All right, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks to those who are rejoining us as we reconvene the Mid-Atlantic Council meeting. As I mentioned before the break, our next agenda item is going to be the recreational tilefish permitting and reporting framework. We have across the table from me, Hannah and Jose from staff that will be going through the presentation. So whenever you two are ready, take us away, please. Oh, and Mary, sorry.
Oh, thank you. So why are we here today? We are going to review the public input and committee's recommendation and take final action on the recreational tilefish permitting and reporting framework. So I will first give you a quick background on the current program and why it needs improvement. Then Hannah is going to walk us through each of the alternatives that are being considered in the document. Then we're going to review the public comments, the Tilefish Committee recommendations, and then you're going to be selecting preferred alternative and take final action. So the permitting and reporting requirements were implemented late 2020. This is a free vessel-based private recreational tilefish permit, and an EVTR is required to be submitted within 24 hours of returning to port after a trip where tilefish were targeted. Now, since these requirements were implemented, the council had yearly updates provided by GARFO on the trends in the numbers of permits, the number of trips reported, and the number of tilefish caught. Now, as you know, this fishery occurs far offshore, and in comparison to some of the other managed species, relatively few anglers target tilefish, and therefore few anglers are intercepted through MRIP. Given the low intercept rate, MRIP tilefish estimate for this species include very high percent standard errors associated with those values, and often greater than 80%, making these estimates highly uncertain. So because of this, the rationale for these requirements was to collect reliable catch data, which was and still remains a key data gap for both of the tilefish species. As an example, in 2024, there were 1,484 permits that were issued by GARFO. Less than 4% of the permit holders reported catches that year, and only 96 trips were reported. Now, in 2024, a program evaluation was conducted with the objective to better understand why the private recreational reporting rates are so low and identify potential factors that will increase angler participation in the program. And here are some of the things that we got from that program evaluation, some of the points. Number one, that the reporting fields are too technical and confusing. It is hard to recall specific details like depth, location, latitude, longitude, or hook count after a trip. And overall, that the requirements felt like they were designed for commercial boats and not recreational anglers. So why does good data matters? So accurate catch data is essential for conducting stock assessment and evaluating the health of these fish stocks. Paul Nishke, the stock assessment person at the Northeast Fisheries Science Center, has indicated multiple times that improving catch estimate is one of the highest priorities for both of these species. Now, this data gap is specifically consequential for blue line tilefish, where 73% of the ABC is allocated to the recreational sector. And it's also important for golden tilefish, which currently does not have a recreational allocation, nevertheless is subject to fishing pressure. Without reliable catch data, it is difficult to understand total removals every year for this species, or to evaluate how recreational harvest might influence the stock of the status of the stock. Without accurate catch data, assessment scientists must rely on highly uncertain assumptions about the catch, and this reduces the confidence that managers and stakeholders place on the results.
So given all that Jose said, the purpose of this framework action is to consider changes to the private recreational tilefish permitting and reporting program and seeks to identify an approach that reduces unnecessary burden, improves clarity and enforceability, and supports the collection of reliable information needed for stock assessments and management. And the need for this action is to address ongoing challenges with the current program, including low compliance, confusion over reporting requirements, limited enforceability, and concerns about overall data accuracy. So as we presented during the December council meeting, there are 4 main alternatives being considered through this action. These alternatives really cover the full range of changes that the council could consider, including alternative 1, which is the no action option, alternative 2, which would remove the program entirely, including the permit as well as the reporting requirements. Alternative 3 would maintain the permit but remove the reporting requirements. And then alternative 4 would modify the reporting requirements. So diving a little deeper into each alternative, the first alternative, the no action option, is straightforward and would keep everything as is, which means the vessel owners would still be required to obtain a free vessel permit prior to going on any tilefish trips each year. EVTRs would still be required on each trip targeting tilefish, even if none are caught, within 24 hours of returning to port. And the current 16 required reporting fields would remain. And if anyone is curious to see the list of what those fields are, I do have a backup slide with that information. For this alternative, it's important to consider that since these requirements were implemented in 2020, we have seen reporting rates between 2 to 4%. So without any changes, the challenges and lack of reliable catch information for tilefish will continue to be a large data gap. Alternative 2, however, would remove the program entirely, so the vessel permit as well as the vessel trip reports would no longer be required. Some points to consider here include the limited number of reported trips each year really has limited the program's value for science and management decisions. So continued investment in improving the program may not improve the overall data collection. And if the program was eliminated, the council could consider approaches to collect tilefish catch information in the future through an alternative method. Some key trade-offs for this is it would eliminate the burden on anglers, but it would also eliminate the only dedicated source of private recreational tilefish catch data and the ability to identify the universe of anglers that are targeting tilefish. Then alternative 3 would maintain the permit, but would eliminate the reporting requirements. Some considerations here, alternative 3 would maintain a list of vessels targeting tilefish, so the permit would almost serve as a registry of who is fishing for these species. This alternative also acknowledges that, like alternative 2, the current reporting structure is not producing usable information, we could shift our focus on some other method into the future. Additionally, given this option would maintain the list of vessels that participate in the fishery, that could also be kind of a starting point if we wanted to explore alternative methods for collecting catch information for these species. The trade-off for alternative 3, similar to alternative 2, is it would eliminate the reporting burden on anglers, but unlike alternative 2, alternative 3 would maintain that universe of vessels targeting tilefish, so it could serve as a future purpose. Last is alternative 4, which considers 5 sub-alternatives that would modify different aspects of the current reporting program. The first 3 sub-alternatives are specific to the information anglers are required to report. And then the last 2 sub-alternatives would modify the timing requirement for submitting an EVTR. I'd also like to note under alternative 4, any number of these 5 sub-alternatives could be selected. So the council could choose to move forward with one of them, all of them, or any combination of these. Specifically, subalternative 4.1 and 4.2 would simplify the current reporting requirements. Subalternative 4.1 would eliminate the requirement to report effort, including trips targeting tilefish, even if none are caught, to only require reported trips when tilefish are caught. This change means that even if you plan a trip to go out to the canyons and deep drop, if you catch no tilefish at all, you would not need to report a trip. As for subalternative 4.2, this option would simplify what is currently required to report and considers removing fields that anglers reported were confusing or being overly technical, some of what Jose went over. So under subalternative 4.2, the reporting fields like gear type, hook size, soak time, depth, latitude, longitude, and chart area would be removed, and only the fields that help identify who the permit holder is and information useful to estimating catch or for management purpose, such as the number of each of the tilefish landed or discarded, number of anglers, port and state landed would be maintained. I'd also like to note that previously species was included as a field to be removed, since that was thought to be repetitive to the number of blue line and tilefish caught. However, after conversations with Garfo, we would instead add that to the list of fields that would be kept. And I'll get into why species should be kept a little later in the presentation. The potential changes under subalternative 4.1 and 4.2 really focus on the number one priority to collect accurate catch information for tilefish and removes the fields that are not needed for such purposes and are the most common source of confusion and frustration for anglers. So subalternative 4.3, however, would add a requirement to report length of each tilefish caught, which could be helpful in understanding the size of tilefish caught and useful for stock assessments. However, some important considerations here, adding the requirement to report length would overall add to the complexity of the reporting requirements and conflicts with the primary goal of this framework action. This framework was also included in the presidential executive order that emphasized reducing regulatory burden. And when the council first reviewed this framework action during their October 2025 and again at the December 2025 meeting, some council members expressed interest instead of making length a voluntary field as opposed to a required one. So given some interest in exploring voluntary reporting fields, staff has been digging into what this would mean. Some overall benefits of adding length as an optional or voluntary field is that it better aligns with the framework goal and overall simplifying the reporting requirements. Also, anglers who choose to report length would likely be more careful about accurate measurements since they're volunteering to report this information. It's something they care about, and so it should technically result in higher quality data because they're willing participants. Making this field optional also eliminates the potential best guess problem, given, again, these people are willing to give this information rather than feeling pressured to provide a rough estimate to fulfill a requirement. And then from a statistical or a scientific and management perspective, even a subset of voluntary reported length data could be valuable to stock assessments and understanding size composition. And voluntary length information has been used in other assessments, such as bluefish and black sea bass. However, when staff met with Garfo to talk through how this would go about on the implementation side, there was a lot of concerns raised about how this would likely largely increase the implementation timeline and overall workload associated with that, given Garfo would have to closely coordinate with all the different app developers on the voluntary fields on top of the any required changes through this framework action. And they noted that nothing like this has ever been implemented before, so they were also unsure exactly how this would work. Garfo also raised concerns that optional fields could lead to general confusion regarding what is required versus what is not, and therefore unreliable or even inconsistent data. And they noted that voluntary fields would not be exempt from Paperwork Reduction Act requirements. So those still would be triggered under voluntary or required fields. So the council should carefully weigh the overall potential benefits against the implementation concerns expressed by Garfo when recommending a final decision to the agency. And then getting into the last two subalternatives, 4.4 and 4.5, these would modify the timing requirement for submitting an EVTR. 4.4 would require the EVTR be filled out on the water during a tilefish trip as the information becomes available. But subalternative 4.4 alone would still allow that angler 24 hours to submit and complete their report. 4.4 alone ensures a record exists during the trip as well as once the angler has returned to port, and it gives something law enforcement that they can check against what they have in their coolers versus what they've reported. Subalternative 4.4 also matches what other sectors are already doing, so what's already required for the for-hire and commercial sector. And then subalternative 4.5 would require the EVTR be submitted before taking any fish off the boat. This is consistent with the council's original recommendation through Amendment 6. So when these requirements were originally added to the Tilefish FMP, and it provides a clear enforcement tool. However, as I mentioned on the previous slide, any combination of the different subalternatives under alternative 4 could be adopted. So both 4.4 as well as 4.5 together provides the greatest enforceability tool by not only requiring the anglers to fill out the report while they're getting the information, so on the water, as well as to submit it once they get to the dock. So here shows all of the alternatives at a glance, with the table showing the comparison of the permit and reporting requirements, as well as the key impacts of the 4 main alternatives. And then at the bottom is a reminder of the 5 sub-alternatives under alternative 4 and what each of those are. So what I just went over. As you may know, we also held a public input meeting early March to gather feedback on the permitting and reporting requirements and the framework alternatives. Overall, we had a good turnout, but only 6 recreational participants provided feedback. So just for a general high-level summary, of those that provided feedback, 2 participants were supportive of eliminating the reporting requirement, and 1 of those were also in favor of eliminating the program altogether, so the permit as well. These individuals felt that the program was unnecessarily burdensome and voiced that many anglers were unaware of that these requirements exist. One of these participants also voiced frustration with the dual reporting requirement when targeting HMS and tilefish on the same trip. However, they did note that if the program were to continue, they strongly advocated for at least simplifying the reporting requirements. And then one of these commenters, the one that supported eliminating the reporting requirement but maintaining the permits, he recommended that a small fee be added to obtain a permit to try and deter anglers from getting a permit with no real intention of targeting tilefish. During the meeting, there were also 3 commenters in support of maintaining the permanent reporting requirements, but they were all supportive of simplifying the requirements, so supportive of subalternative 4.2. These commenters noted that recreational tilefish effort has increased, and there is a need to better understand total removals each year from all sectors. They highlighted that good catch estimates are necessary to stock assessments and management, and one individual expressed that he didn't want to see our tilefish population decline like some of the Gulf and South Atlantic deep water species have. These commenters also expressed concern that eliminating the program would result in over-reliance on MRIP, which they viewed as particularly unreliable. During the meeting, there was also support for replacing the latitude and longitude field with a canyon-based drop-down. And when staff asked if recreational anglers are typically familiar with what canyon they are fishing, those that provided comments indicated that anglers going that far offshore know exactly where they are. Commenters also indicated that anglers would likely be more inclined to provide this information rather than their exact fishing location or quote-unquote fishing holes. There were also comments related to the lack of awareness with the permanent reporting requirements more generally and the need to conduct a more effective education outreach to improve compliance. So then the Tilefish Committee also met in early March to review the public comment and recommend preferred alternatives for full council consideration. During the meeting, there were some key topics of discussion, including the length reporting. During this discussion, one committee member in particular felt strongly that length should be added as a reporting requirement. And they felt that not adding it would be a missed opportunity. However, other committee members, although they recognize that this information is important and needed, they agreed that it's important at this point to maintain simplicity with the reporting requirements. And most committee members agreed to keep this as kind of a future consideration, possibly as a citizen science program. There was also some discussion related to the canyon-based location reporting recommended during that public input meeting. Committee members were supportive of collecting this type of information and agreed it was more valuable than, for example, port or state landed. But at the same time, they recognized that adding something new like this would further complicate things on the implementation process. So when GARF was trying to make these changes to the actual apps and on the data side, and so they felt that keeping it simple would probably be best. There were also comments related to enforcement and education. One committee member asked if there have been any violations written for these regulations, and past Ellie has reported 2 $500 fines issued, but that in general, the current 24-hour submission window adds extra challenge to enforcing the reporting requirements specifically. Given that, the committee highlighted that subalternative 4.5 offers not only a dockside enforcement tool, but also an education opportunity. And during the discussion, committee members also indicated the need for better and more outreach and education, such as stronger communication with permit holders, as well as an increase in outreach at fishing shows and other popular angler events. Then there was also some discussion associated with the initial recommendation to remove the species fields, which we touched on earlier in the presentation. One committee member asked if removing the species field would eliminate our ability to distinguish between blue line and golden catch. Staff was under the impression that it would not, but noted that they would follow up with GARFO to confirm. So based on the committee's discussion, the group ultimately recommended subalternative 4.1, 4.2, and 4.5 as the preferred alternatives for full council consideration. They highlighted that subalternative 4.1 and 4.2 helps to streamline the reporting and removes the reporting fields that are the primary source of angler confusion. And then subalternative 4.5 provides a better enforcement tool and is also consistent with the council's original intent when these regulations were initially adopted through Amendment 6. So during the committee meeting, as I noted, a number of questions came up that later staff sought clarification on during a follow-up meeting with GARFO. One of these questions was asking for clarification on the Paperwork Reduction Act and potential implications. I noted on slide 14, it was clarified that Paperwork Reduction Act requirements would be triggered for any changes to the reporting requirements, including changes to the required fields as well as the voluntary fields. So voluntary fields would not be exempt from this. As I noted earlier, there was also committee comments about removing the species fields and if it would have any unintended consequences. During the follow-up meeting, staff learned that the species field is really needed for technical reasons and is important to how data is organized and maintained on the back end through the agency's platform. We also talked through outreach and education responsibilities and some potential communication improvements that could be made. Garfo indicated that additional communication with permit holders could be done relatively easily, and we're open to incorporating more regular communication throughout the fishing season. And then during the meeting, Garfo also related some general concerns with modifying the reporting requirements in general, and noted that any changes to reporting will be a significant workload, not only in updating the various applications, but also figuring out how such changes are integrated into the existing data structure. And they noted that given current priorities and workloads, any changes are unlikely to occur before fiscal year 2028. So that's just kind of a heads up. So given all that, staff recommend just slightly updating the committee recommendation to clarify that the species field would now fall under the keep column under sub-alternative 4.2, given what we learned from Garfo. And as part of today's discussion, the council could also consider including a list of non-regulatory recommendations to submit to Garfo along with that framework action to get at some of those outreach and education opportunities that we discussed with them. This is not required by any means, but just something if the council's interested in. And I've listed kind of the outreach and education opportunities that Garfo indicated would be easily for them to implement, and it's really focusing on communication with permit holders throughout the season, reminding of the reporting requirements and stuff like that. So just a quick reminder of what comes next. So if the council were to take final action today, then in spring and summer, staff would work to submit the rulemaking package to Garfo, and then they would work through the federal rulemaking process. And as I highlighted on the previous slide, implementation, Garfo Express would highly unlikely to occur before fiscal year 2028. So with that, just a reminder, the objectives of today are to recommend preferred alternatives for submission to NIMS. And if there is any interest, the council could also consider recommending those non-regulatory outreach and education recommendations as well as part of that package. And with that, that concludes the presentation. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Great, thank you, well, Hannah and Jose, and I want to thank the committee as well for the review and the comments that they've put together for us. I believe they also, a motion was coming out of committee on this as well. Is that correct? Yeah. Okay. So with that, I'll look around the table. Are there any questions on this? Okay, not seeing any questions on the presentation. We can go into a bit of a discussion if anyone has anything. If not, we can look to the committee motion. Okay. Lori Nolan?
No, there we go. I'm going to go to the bottom of the list for the other non-regulatory recommendations, if that's okay. And I was just thinking and wanted to ask Mr. Pentney what he thinks if, we have this huge disconnect, 1,400 permits on the street, and it looks like we have such low compliance, 4% of the permits are reporting, basically. And I'll argue that it's an open access permit, and most likely 1,400 permits are being issued, but there are not 1,400 participants. So I'm wondering if going forward, when it comes to the permitting process, if we could ask the permit applicant how many trips he made last year. Could there be a field where or we could set up 0 to 5, 5 to 10 or something, just to really try to hone in on whether or not we have a huge disconnect or how big the disconnect really is.
You want to respond, Mike?
Sure. Thanks, Mr. Chair. Thanks, Lori. That's an interesting question. I don't have a immediate answer because I'd want to check with staff to see, what the implication is of sort of adding a question on the permit application form. But yeah, I mean, I think it's a good, that's a reasonable question to ask and a reasonable way to get at the point that you made, which I agree with, that we're assuming that 1,400 permits and a fraction of those reporting means non-compliance, when it might just mean that a lot of people are checking a box to get a permit and then never taking a trip or never catching a tilefish. And it's almost impossible to know what's really happening. There's probably some proportion of both. And so if we can, and the council, wants to add that, I think that's a reasonable thing for us to pursue if we can do it, to ask that question on the permit application. Again, I can't commit to it because I'd have to check with the staff and see what the implications of that are. It probably entails Paperwork Reduction Act clearance and those sorts of things. But it's something that I think isn't that big of an ask if we're able to do it.
Okay, thanks, Jim. Did you have a follow-up to that or another question?
Yeah, because I think either during with the last couple of meetings, one of the questions I think it was raised was why couldn't we just do a survey of the 1,400? Because it's such a small number, and I don't think there was really an answer to it. So going along with Lori's suggestion, if we could add a question or a couple of questions to that part of the thing, I'm not just checking the box off. I actually went tilefish fishing, or essentially you could accomplish the results of a survey from that without having. So we get to the Paperwork Reduction Act. We're not doing a survey any longer. We're just adding a couple of questions to the application process that are going to provide us survey information about if this is valuable or not. So just something else to consider on maybe fixing this is to fix the application, not the report, or do both, fix the application and the reporting. Thanks.
Craig Healy.
Yeah, so I think it's a good idea. I do. I just think my question is here, a lot of people, or what my statement's going to be here, is that they don't go out targeting tilefish. So like you said, Mike, they're checking the box, okay, and they're getting their permit and everything else. But, they are falling back on that. I would say the majority of the fishermen, and I do a fair amount of it too, and I think you guys do too as well. So it may just be adding something else, and I'm just playing the other side of the coin here to the list as we're trying to simplify the list and get them to fill it out. And it's just adding another question to them, why? And from my standpoint, that's what I would look at as a recreational, because most trips aren't put together for tilefish. Okay, they're going offshore, and they're going. Okay, let's just say they end up in the Hudson and they can't catch them there or whatever. So let's go tile fishing up on the flats and on East Elbow or wherever. And that's what I'm trying to get at with that.
Lori?
Thank you. Just to that point, this is you're telling, when you apply for your permit, you're telling the service how many trips you made last year. You're not predicting what you're doing this year. You're saying, I went out X number of times last year, just to get a feel. And again, we're talking two species. I don't know if you have to have a golden and a blue to differentiate, but just to get a feel for the fact that there's over 1,400 permits on the street, and it looks like such poor compliance, just to try to get a feel for this and tease it out in the easiest way. It's nothing to report on the VTR. This is just when you apply for your permit, done, end of story. I'm not trying to add a field to the VTR. And it's, again, just something I thought of right now, today.
Bobby Rule.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I completely agree with what the intent of what Ms. Nolan's trying to get at here, but I, I don't know how you would flesh it out, because if you have a questionnaire to where it's like, how many trips did you make for tilefish, 1 or 5, whatever, that implies a directed tilefish trip, as opposed to, as Greg was saying, a lot of people that end up landing tilefish, it's not a directed tilefish trip. They're going offshore. It's a fishing trip. And they may be going for billfish. They may be going for tuna. They may, anything. And if they can't find it, then hey, we'll stop in here and we'll see if we can catch some tilefish. So I don't know how you would tease that out, considering it's not the same as a commercial. You couldn't prosecute it the same way you do commercially, because a commercial trip is a dedicated trip for, an individual fishery. When you have in the recreational aspect, you have, you're going fishing, you catch what you catch. You're not really, nobody is leaving with a directed tilefish trip, to my knowledge. So, I mean, it's important information, but I don't know how you would really get at it.
Scott?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I tend to agree with Lori on this. I just filled out my license for Delaware or something like that, and there were several of these types of questions, just more general info stuff. And I think that it would be very valuable for the application process, because then not only do you know the universe of people that are fishing, you also have a little bit of an estimate whether they're fudging it or not on how many trips they've taken. And it can be as simple as, how many times did you fish for blue line tilefish last year on your permit? At least we're getting a little bit of information there. But also agree with Greg, and we talked about this in the committee. Certainly don't want to add any fields to the reporting process, because people aren't reporting right now as it is. And if we make that more complicated, then I think they're going to be less likely to report in the future. But I do agree with putting something on there about how many times maybe you fish for tilefish over the course of the last year.
Jim Gilmore?
Learning from having something that's free from New York and New Jersey on our marine registry, that we have the worst compliance, whatever. If you did charge a fee, how complicated would it be to charge a fee for this? Would it be a nightmare? Or because essentially once you put, as again, what we learned from the MRIP data is, if you put a fee on something, people tend more to comply. Our judges in New York have told us, when we go into court, well, it doesn't cost anything, so it has no value. And they don't understand, well, the value is the data. So is that something that's just a dead on arrival, trying to charge a fee? Thanks.
Mike Penny?
Yeah, I mean, I know that theoretically we are able to charge a fee for permits. We don't get to keep the money. But we are able to charge a fee for permits, but I mean, obviously none of our permits cost anything. So, the idea of implementing, and this is something I'm going to say, I'm going to say this now, and I'm probably going to refer to it a number of times. Everything in this action, that's being proposed by, potentially proposed by the council, when it comes to us for review and implementation, we're going to have to balance the potential value of the change with the resources necessary to implement the change. And, given this fishery, I think it's going to be pretty hard for us to prioritize this over pretty much everything else that we're trying to get done over the next few years. So kind of, following on from that, the work that would entail charging $10, $50, $100, whatever it is, for a recreational tilefish permit, just to implement the systems to allow us to do that, particularly given that we won't get the money. They just go directly to the treasury. I just don't see that as a really promise. I understand the intent of trying to filter out some of the people just checking a box with no intention to go fish for tilefish. But I just don't see it being worth the resources required.
Okay, Joe Grist?
There it is. I understand where Lori's going with this. I do. My question though, since you proposed it, if I went tallfish fishing last year and I caught and I didn't report, that question comes up for me reapplying for this year. How likely is it I'm going to make note that I went fishing for tallfish at all when I already know I didn't report it? So am I not opening myself up to say I'm making myself liable for something if someone utilizes it to do a after action check for enforcement? Fair question. I'm just throwing that out there. Not you, your suggestion is good.
Hannah, did you have a follow-up?
Yeah, I just wanted to highlight, so, one thing that this sort of came up, when we met with Garfo staff, it wasn't adding a box like what Lori was suggesting specifically. It was more adding a box, kind of highlighting that, you're getting this permit. Please understand that there are also reporting requirements, that are included in having this permit. So it was more of like an information, like, click this and I understand there are actually reporting requirements, which maybe gets at what Lori's saying in a different way. And Garfo noted that something like that would be easy because it wouldn't trigger any PRA implications that they could think of off the top of their head or anything like that. But we didn't recommend it because again, it's just checking a box and anyone could check that box and maybe you checked that box and you didn't actually read it. So there's a lot to unpack there, but wanted to at least tell you guys about it.
Thank you, Jim.
Last chat, and just to Joe's point, and I think that could be an incentive to report. Yes, I didn't report, but one of the things was, I think in one of the slides was that people aren't aware of it. And suddenly, oh, I was supposed to report that? Oh, I'm going to lie this year and say I didn't catch anything, but maybe the following year you get better compliance.
All right, well, I appreciate some of the thoughts. You had your hand up, and then I did have one from the public, but go ahead, Lisa, sorry.
Okay. What if, I was just thinking, maybe it would be easier that if it said online, anyone applying for the free tile fish permit, you're required to report, when you go fishing, you're required to report every time you go fishing, whether you're targeting tile fish or not, because you have the permit. Then you would know, or you're required every time you go fishing to report, then wouldn't that tell you how many trips they took? And then if they caught tile fish, they could report did not fish. Like we have to do that sometimes. Or they could report targeting tile fish. So if you're going to get a permit, you have to report no matter what. If you didn't fish, you report, and if you do fish, you report. But that way you know. It's just, and if the reporting is simplified, it wouldn't be a problem. Maybe.
Right, well, I'll look maybe to staff just to clarify what we're dealing with now and the concerns of, as I think, Mike Pentney kind of spoke to this a little bit. It's hard to know the intent for some of the trips, but I think some of the points that you covered were things that have been discussed in the past. So I'd look to staff to see if, since some of that has probably been discussed.
Yeah, I think there's a bunch of things going on, right? So in 2024, we met with anglers to figure out why we're seeing such low reporting rates. Is it because people are just getting the permit to check the box? Is it because they don't know about things, or is it because they just don't want to? And I think it's a combination of it all. Some people are unaware of the regulations. Some people reported that the reporting is burdensome, so they might start it and not finish it because they're like, well, I'm a private recreational angler and I'm doing this for fun. Why am I doing this? And then I think there's also some of the, it's a checkbox, right? So someone doesn't know in February if they're going to go target tilefish, but maybe they will. So they get that permit anyways, because it does take a little bit of time to get the permit. So I think there's all of that going on. Right now, for any of our EVTRs, there aren't any did not fish report requirements. That's been something that the council has talked about in the past, but I think there's some pros and cons to requiring did not fish reports. So we ultimately haven't moved forward with any action of adding that. So I think that gets to some of your question, but I'm not quite sure if it gets all of it.
I was just thinking it would let you know if people were just getting the permit to have it because it's free, or if they're actually intending to fish with it. That's all. Yeah. Thank you, Hannah.
Okay, thank you. So, Mike, did you have something you wanted to speak to?
Yeah, thanks. So I had a couple of comments. I think, one, just so people understand, the private tilefish permit, when you get the permit, on the front, it says private recreational tilefish 2025 or 2026 effective dates. And the whole back of the permit is you're required to report. Here's how you report. Here are the apps you can, here's where you go to download the apps that you can use to report. Here's when you have to report. So anybody who says they have the permit and doesn't know that they're required to report hasn't read the permit. So, I just want to make sure that people understand that all of that information is directly on the permit that they're getting. The second thing is, I know, and Hannah said that, one of the things that they heard was it's complicated, it's technical. And I admit that, because there's a variety of apps that one can use to report recreationally caught tilefish, most of them were designed for commercial fishing. And so to a private angler who's coming in for the first time, those could be kind of, overwhelming and confusing and seem very complicated. But the council invested a fair bit of money in EFIN, which was designed just for private recreational tilefish. And I've seen that app in action, and I can't imagine that you could have a simpler, more straightforward process to report a fish. And so I wonder if, in the terms of the communication and the outreach and the education component, if it's not so much about telling people they have to report, but making them aware of EFIN as sort of the primary, what should be the primary reporting app for, recreational tilefish, because it was designed. I do have a number of concerns about the recommendations that came out of the committee in terms of changes to the reporting requirements. Some of them I think are simply unworkable within our current system. And I think, staff heard that from my team, which is why it would, we wouldn't even be starting that process until sometime in 2028. And, I also question the value of the data if we don't know where the fish were caught. It seems like we're trying to understand what's happening in the tilefish, to the resource, for example, knowing whether the fish was caught off of Long Island or off of North Carolina seems kind of important. Knowing what gear is being used and is a factor of catch per unit effort. I think that's something that you'd want to track over time to see if you're seeing, increases or decreases in CPUE, which could tell us about what's happening, to the fishery and the resource. And so for a number of reasons, I have concerns with the committee's recommendation. And again, I'll just flag that, the notion that, frankly, this isn't going to be a real high priority when it comes to us, given all of the other things that the council wants us to work on between this council, New England Council, and the commission. So just, please be keeping that in mind when ultimately you're voting on motions.
Okay, thanks. Laura, is this okay?
The explanation we got was 2028 was when this when we could expect implementation. Is that not reflective of reality, or is 2028 truly an accurate date for when we could expect implementation?
I think it was no sooner than. So it could be 2028, it could be later, depending on what issues, you know, might come up between now and then.
Okay, we have one hand from the public. Mr. Fletcher, I don't know if you have a question or if you have comments that you'd like to make. If you have comments, I would say you may want to wait until we get a motion, but if you have questions for staff, go ahead.
Question for you. Did you ever consider contacting Mr. Andrew Peterson with Bluefin Data? That is one question. The second question, in order to issue a permit for Mr. Penske, can there be a requirement that a cell phone electronic reporting has to be part of getting the permit? Can you require a cell phone reporting system as part of the permit? Two questions, answer please.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Fletcher. I think the first one staff will take, and then I'll look to the RA to see if you want to or can make comments to the second part of that question. Go ahead, Hannah.
Yeah, so we met with Andrew. He's the developer, or I think I forget what his title is, but he works in the Bluefin Data app. Great meeting with him, wonderful guy. He walked us through the Bluefin Data app and how it looks on the back end and stuff like that. Under certain scenarios, that is one of the app that tilefish anglers can already use. There's a little bit of nuances of when you can use it. You have to be a main fisherman, weirdly, just because of you have to. The Bluefin Data app, not just anyone can download and use it. You have to be an approved user on their end, and the way the tilefish stuff is integrated in it, it's really only integrated in their main reporting stuff. So that was an interesting tidbit to learn, but they have been following this action and are looking to see what the council ends up taking final action on. So I'm sure future work with them is in our books.
Thank you, Hannah. Mike Pentney.
Yeah, I just wanted to follow up on the Bluefin Data thing because according to our webpage, which I'm reading right now, anybody can use Bluefin Data vessel to report for standard EVTRs, but not lobster. It's to use Bluefin Data, you have to be a main lobster vessel. But for example, for recreational blue line tilefish, the box is checked, so it should be available to blue line tilefish fishermen.
Yes, I think there's some nuances to it, and Andrew is online tuning in, so and maybe I butchered some of it, but I don't want to put Andrew on the spot, but if he is available and wants to speak to it, I think that'd be helpful, or we could follow up after the fact.
Okay, I'm not seeing a hand, but Andrew, if you would like to respond, and you can unmute your mic and go ahead. If not, I'll start calling names. I didn't mean I'll start calling you names. I mean I'll continue to go down the list. Sorry. Okay, not hearing any additional information on that. I guess, the potential to have better clarification on that would be important. But let's get a few more names in here. So I have Mike Wayne next, and then we'll go to Kate Wilkie. Go ahead, Mike.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Quick question to Garfo staff. Are the individuals that obtain a tilefish permit, are those public records that are available?
I'm not sure about that. I'll have to double check.
Mr. Chair, quick thought.
Staff says yes.
Would that include contact information? Just to give more context for the question, I know that the agency is somewhat, their hands are somewhat tied with Paperwork Reduction Act, et cetera. But I'm just wondering if there was opportunity to know what the sort of universe of permit holders looks like. I think industry could do more on education and outreach directly to permit holders. That's the context for the question.
Yeah, Mike, well, there's, some conferral going on over that. I do think, there's the education and outreach components that we've been discussing here. There may be other ways that help us get at a universe to contact that may even be perhaps even better than having the list of all names, but I'll look back to the service to see if there's further response on your question request there.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not really sure. I think that's something that we would want to not give an off the cuff response to either way. I think it's, I would feel comfortable, like if the idea was, can we provide the list of permit holders to the council because the council wants to do a mailing or something? I think that's one thing. If we're talking about, publishing everybody's contact information on the web for some reason, a little more hesitant to say, yeah, we can do that.
Like are you good with that?
Yeah,
response?
I'm good. Yeah, I this is not a nefarious request. It's just me brainstorming some ideas on how to help here. Thanks.
No, it's much appreciated. And like I said, I think there may be some other ways to kind of help get out that information to permit holders without having maybe a direct list of everyone's contact information. So it's something to think about. Very much appreciate the question. Go to Kate Wilkie next.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Hi, everyone. Kate Wilkie with the Nature Conservancy. I have a question for probably Mr. Pentney, but I'll just say really quickly that the Nature Conservancy is supportive of maintaining simplified reporting requirements. And my question is, Mr. Pentney, you were alluding to there may be some sort of alternatives that are non-starters from Garfo's perspective, and I was wondering if it was the change in requirement to report like upon or before offloading fish. And if so, I was curious. Well, I guess I'll let you answer that question first, and then I just have a quick follow-up.
So yeah, the requirement to report before offloading fish, that's one of those things that would make the wreck tilefish reporting requirements inconsistent with every other reporting system we have. But it doesn't break anything. So from that perspective, I don't object. I guess that's my answer, Kate.
Okay, well, thanks for clarifying that. And I was just thinking about the required reporting for recreational anglers in the Gulf. And that there is for red snapper, and there's a requirement to report before offloading, so it does work. And I think that it really enables enforcement in it. Because as we've talked about, I mean, if there's a longer time period of allowing people to report, there's just no way to enforce that. So, okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, thank you, Kate. Mike, did you have a follow-up?
Well, I mean, just that, the way we handle commercial fishing reporting is, they're supposed to initiate the trip report before they land, and they're supposed to fill out as much as can be, I think the word is ascertainable, before they land, recognizing that there are some things that, you can't know before you're tied up at the dock offloading fish. So I think most of the things that we would be expecting private anglers to report should be known before they offload fish. Where did they fish? When did they fish? What gear did they use? How many did they catch? Those things should be ascertainable before they hit the dock. Whether they submit the report or not, enforcement could say, well, show me that you've started your VTR and what information have you filled out already. So there is, I think, an enforcement angle to the current reporting system in terms of the timeliness. This adds another layer, which maybe would make it helpful for enforcement. I'd want to hear from OLE on that. But just flagging that just because we don't require them to have submitted the VTR before they offload fish doesn't mean we don't already require them to have started the VTR and filled out what they can fill out before they offload fish.
Hannah, did you have something to add to that?
Yeah, just to follow up, currently in the private recreational language, that language about starting a report and reporting the stuff that is available at the time is not in there. So that's only currently required for hire and commercial, not for private recreational. And that's what subalternative 4.4 is recommending, adding that language.
All right, I stand corrected. Thank you, Hannah.
Okay, and I did see a hand go up online from Andrew Peterson. So Andrew, if you wanted to respond to that earlier question, or if there was something else you wanted to point out.
Yeah, no, sorry, that was it. I wasn't ready to speak at the moment, so I had to get my audio set up in preparation for that. So I apologize for the delay. Mike, I guess to address the question, yes, as Hannah pointed out, there is some nuance to the use cases of vessel. Maine DMR has used the vessel system for quite some time now, and we had to go through the GARFO approval process, implement the GARFO reporting requirements for the state of Maine, and on that website of approved vendors, you'll see a special note that kind of outlines the use case for a vessel at the current moment. We have been in touch with council staff about modifications to the system to address this specific need. It wouldn't necessarily be a heavy lift for us to build a tilefish specific form for this very specific use case of anglers that need to report outside of the state of Maine. Some of the details have to be ironed out. Some of those nuances have to be discussed, and that's pretty much where we stand. So the only other comment I would make is that 2028 timeframe of making modifications that would be vendor specific, as in not all vendors may have to wait till 2028 to make modifications for this.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate the additional information there. With that, it looks like we had a pretty thorough round there. I don't know if there's anything else that staff wanted to go to before we get to the committee motion. If not, if we can bring that up, I'd appreciate it. Thank you.
So it's not exactly the committee motion because remember that species field, that nuance. So, but it's pretty much exactly. So I'll turn it over to the committee chair.
Mike Louise, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm glad Hannah put that up there. I was going to clarify that the species element of what we discussed earlier would be added to what we thought at the committee was something that was going to be removed, but it's up there. So I'll read this into the record on behalf of the committee. So move to adopt subalternative 4.1, remove requirement to report effort-only trips. Revised subalternative 4.2, simplify the required reporting fields with the species field maintained. And subalternative 4.5, require EVTR submission before offloading fish as preferred alternatives for the recreational tilefish permitting and reporting framework. I'll make that on behalf of the committee, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate that. And that's coming out of committee. We do not need a second. we've had a fairly robust discussion, but I am interested to see, where the winds are blowing here. So, well, I guess we can get into discussion. Mike, was there anything else that you felt needed to be added? I think the committee stuff was fairly well covered.
Yeah, the committee met a couple weeks ago, and we had a really good discussion. And I think there is still a little bit of a question as to what we just talked about a few minutes ago, about the difference between the reporting requirements between 4.4 and 4.5, and kind of now that this motion is property of the council, I guess if there are suggestions or other ways that the council wants to address it, now's the time to make changes. I was asked earlier to fold some of the conversations that I was having earlier in the day into this motion, but I wanted to keep this clean coming out of the committee, and then the rest of it's up for debate. Thanks.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I agree, Mike. That's, I think, this is a good place to start. Again, I appreciate the work that the committee did and obviously all the work that staff's been doing on this. So with that said, I'll start with Lori Nolan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, bottom line, I'd like to add 4.4. I'd like to see the council add 4.4 to this motion also. And reason being, at the committee when we met, 4.4 was part of the staff recommendation at that meeting. And I misunderstood the timing, in fact, so understanding it better now and hearing the regional administrator's comments and understanding law enforcement's chore and job at trying to enforce something if they were to board someone. I think having 4.4 as part of this motion is very important. I didn't hear Mike say that 4.5 was a deal breaker. So because of that, I would say don't swap them out. I would say leave 4.5 also, unless I heard Mike wrong. I would wish to add 4.4 to the motion.
So Lori, to be clear, you're looking to amend the committee motion to add 4.4?
Yes.
Okay. Do we have a second? Michelle beat you to it, Michelle Duval. Lori, I think, are you good with your explanation there on why? Michelle, did you have anything to add to that? Or?
No, thanks, Mr. Chair. I think we've had the benefit of hearing, the regional administrator, describe why this might be, it would be helpful to have this in for consistency. I don't know that that was entirely clear to us as we were discussing this in committee a couple weeks ago. Thanks.
Okay, let's see. I'm going to take a look at this as well. So we have a motion to amend with a second, and it looks like it's what we're adding it as the subalternative 4.4, and then in parens the. Right. So yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, we made the changes. It's just syncing. So I think the internet is, there we go.
There we go. Okay. So there's the simplified motion to amend. Further discussion on the motion? Scott Lennox.
Joe, quickly, can you just remind us what 4.4 is?
But I bet Hannah could.
Yes, subalternative 4.4 is requiring that the EVTR be filled out as that information becomes available. So not submitted as it becomes available, but filled out. So it would match what is currently required for hire and commercial EVTRs.
Thank you for that clarification. Because of that, I'm not going to support the amendment just because I don't think people are going to do it. I think that this is, less than 4% of the people with permits are reporting right now. And I think we need to make this as simple as we possibly can. I think the requirement for having it submitted before you offload, similar to how Bluefin Tuna was, I think would maybe encourage folks to report. But I think if you add any kind of process, any sort of extra box in the reporting fields online, or any part of trying to, when it becomes available, folks get confused, and I just don't think they're going to do it. So because of that, even though I agree with it, I'm just not going to support it. I think what came out of the committee was the best that we can do for trying to encourage some sort of reporting. Thanks.
Further discussion around the table? Greg?
Yeah, I'm going to go with Scott on this, and I do like the idea. Type of fishermen are suspicious to begin with, is the whole enforcement issue, and I just feel like it's another way of them being watched, and it's just going to find a reason for them not to report. Again, it's just knowing the fishery.
Okay, thanks, man. Paul?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, I think this is critical for enforcement, and I think enforcement is important, but I'm going to agree fully with Scott and Greg that this is going to put us back to where we were. It's really hard for people to fill out information as it comes in on these smaller boats and stuff like that, and I think it's just going to be a huge deterrent.
Okay, if I don't see any more hands around the table, I'm gonna take it out to the public. Any members of the public that want to comment on the current motion to amend? I do see one hand, but I don't know, Kate Wilkie, if that's an older.
That is an old hand, sorry.
No worries. Okay, thank you. So I don't. All right, that was your chance. I'm bringing it back to the table. Well, it sounds like we've got some for and against here. So what I'll do is, if there's no further discussion, I'll call the motion, and if I can get some help counting hands, that'd be great. So all those in favor of the motion to amend, please raise your hand. Okay. Okay, thank you. We got you, Chris Kuhn, thank you. So hands down, very good, thanks. All those opposed to the motion to amend, please raise your hand. So I had 6 in favor and 11 against. Any abstentions? 1 abstention from the service. So the motion to amend fails. That'll bring us back to the committee's motion. And I'll just wait till we get that up. Any further comments on the motion? Not, I'll call the question. Yeah, this is now the main. Mike Pentney?
Yeah, so I am going to oppose the motion. I think, I do have a number of concerns with subalternative 4.2 that's proposing to remove several fields that are really important to our systems. Removing, where they fished and what type of gear they're using, I think are two fields that are, I think, really important. To one of the earlier questions, somebody asked if I oppose 4.5. And I said, no, it doesn't break our system. So, it's I don't object to it. 4.2 breaks our system. And so, when we talked about fiscal year 28 being the soonest we could implement, that's because of the work that would be required for us to implement these changes in our system, and not compromise our entire vessel trip reporting system. It's all one system. All the data go in together and we filter out depending on the fishery. So this would require a substantial amount of work. We do not have the resources this year or next year to even contemplate this. Fiscal year 28, maybe we would have the resources, but who knows what our budget will look like? Who knows what our staffing will look like? Who knows what other priorities we will have that would be higher priorities than this? And so, given all that uncertainty, I'm going to oppose the motion.
Hannah, did you have something that you wanted to?
Yeah, this might be a question for the agency, and maybe this is a silly question, but so right now there are several apps that are allowed, including the Garfo Fish Online. And the Garfo Fish Online, it's my understanding that, right, it's the same as commercial and for hire. So the importance of keeping everything bundled and ask the same questions is important on the data backend. But I'm curious, does the agency have to have its own reporting requirement for tilefish, or since there's other apps that are available like EFIN that is much simpler and it asks questions in certain ways and is okay, like could you, and the data is submitted to ACCSP, I believe, and then given to you guys. So like, is there a back end way that we could still simplify the reporting and it wouldn't cause so much extra work on Garfo's end?
So yeah, I mean, it's a reasonable question, Hannah. I understand what you're getting at is that, you know, we wouldn't necessarily change Fish Online, which is our reporting system. But no, I mean, for us to have the data, for us to be able to access the data and use the data, it has to fit into our systems. And so even if we said we're not going to provide the opportunity for people with, you know, to use Fish Online, we would still have to change our back end to accept the data and to be able to utilize the data.
Okay. Yeah, I think this then it warrants further discussion before I call the motion. I'd certainly like to hear if others have thoughts on perhaps a different way forward. Oh, yeah, okay. See a couple hands. My order was Jim Gilmore, then I'll go to Chris Bat-Savage and then Michelle.
Thanks, Chairman. So if this motion fails, we just go back to status quo. Is that correct? And then part of that was we talked a little bit about, is there something we could do about the application process? So if this motion fails, we go back to status quo and we start all over again. Is that the result of a negative vote?
Yeah, unless there's anything that the service is thinking that we aren't, that I think you laid it out well. So Chris, did you have something?
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chair. I guess we could look at some other options that would just do away with reporting, but I'm not advocating for that. I guess a question for Mike, just to kind of understand the back end issues with just, you know, having the data be usable. If there was, I'm just hypothetically saying, if the committee decided to adopt an option that was brought up by stakeholders of listing the canyons they were fishing, so there's a fishing location, would that be compatible with basically going into, you know, Garfo's existing database, or that also cause complications? In other words, you'd rather have it kind of align with what's already done for other reporting, you know, other reporting such as lat long and things like that.
Sorry, Chris, say the first part again of your question.
Yeah. So if the committee you know, included, you know, reporting location, and it was, you know, canyon, because you know, there was, you know, one stakeholder said, you know, just have like a drop down box and list the canyon, know where they're fishing. Would that be compatible with Garfo's system as far as getting that data into the database? I mean, I think, you know, the app part, people can create that, but if it's not compatible with what Garfo has, I was wondering if that's going to also cause a problem.
I think it I know that, there's a couple different ways that we can collect location. We can, we ask for stat area, which is the commercial fleet is very familiar with that. Or we can ask for or derive the latitude and longitude. But what I mean by derive is, if you go on an app and you drop a pin in the rough location that you're fishing, that creates a lat long point that can be downloaded, and then we can, determine what stat area that's in and assign that trip to that stat area. So those are very simple. And the eFin app lets you literally just like say I'm fishing here, and that gets what we need. The canyon issue is an interesting one because it's very possible that the canyons span multiple stat areas. I'd have to look, but if the canyons spanned multiple stat areas and we're just getting a canyon, not knowing where they are, that could be an issue. That would complicate this.
Other hands, I have Michelle Duval, and then I'll go to Sunny Joe.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I think, the alternatives that we have here today and that the committee discussed a few weeks ago at the beginning of March, I mean, these were the alternatives that we saw and approved in December, right? So, Mike, I don't know if you can elaborate on like what, I guess it might have been helpful to understand these concerns from the service, in December as we were approving the amendment to go out for public comment, with respect to potential impacts on, the reporting system, like from the back end, or, even the ability to fold in, data coming from other electronic reporting apps. So, I mean, I guess maybe when did things change is maybe my question. Thanks.
Yeah, I mean, I may be wrong, but I don't think things have changed. I'm pretty sure that in the last time we talked about this, I expressed concern about losing location of fishing effort. And, there was a lot of discussion around, well, we should have location, or we don't, we shouldn't have location. And so, I have expressed concern about this action from the start in terms of how it fits within our priorities. Maybe we hadn't gone as far as determining what fields, break our current system until we knew kind of where the committee was going to end up. But I feel like we've been expressing concerns throughout the process, maybe not as definitively as I have today, now that we have, feedback from our development team. But I know we, have been expressing concerns throughout.
Sunny Nguyen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My question is for the service. If they oppose this motion and it were to pass, would it change the timeline of 2028 and beyond? Would that change?
No, I mean, if the council approves this and submits it for review, it would be at least probably 2028 before we could implement it.
It wouldn't change the timeline on change on.
Unless the council wants to recommend some things that we should deprioritize, in terms of the other fisheries the council manages.
Joe.
Just follow up with Sunny. He kind of in the same frame of mind I was asking a question. So to Mike, 2028. So let's just theoretically say there was an alternative motion that came up, said we just want to go after, at least put subalternative 4.5 out there, which is an enforcement element, which is very necessary and needed. Same answer, it still would be at least 2028, or is it a possibility if we sub out some of these could actually happen sooner?
All right, so let me I'm going to try to be as clear as possible on this. So subalternative 4.1, while it would be inconsistent, this alternative would not require additional implementation work at the regional office. 4.5, this would be inconsistent with other FMPs, but would not require additional implementation work at the regional office other than the regulatory process. 4.2, gear attributes, and area together form a compound key defining the idea of a subtrip or an effort. To remove these fields fundamentally redefines how a trip with landings is defined in our database. This definition serves all of our regional office programs as well as Southeast programs currently being integrated into the same database. Any workaround for this would incur very significant programming effort and would also likely compromise the value of the data. Additional development resources would be required to modify all existing EBTR applications. Regional office database development needs have been booked out through fiscal year 2027, and addressing this need would be a low priority among competing priorities.
Thanks for the question, John. Thanks, Mike, for getting through all of that. I think that's helpful. I know Jim Gilmore asked the question, what happens if nothing what happens if nothing moves forward? Sorry to ask this question, Chris, but I guess what happens if we take final action, move this forward, it's kind of sitting in the parking lot for several years. If the council wanted to revisit their recommendation, does that start, is that like, would require a framework to start again, or?
Change it.
Yes, yes, I guess to, what happens to a parking lot recommendation to the service if we wanted to change that in the future?
Yeah, so once we submit it, that's what we're basically telling the agency, this is what we want to do, right? So if it's sitting there for a year and a year out, we have a different council, we have, different folks, we have different ideas, we can submit another framework to say, basically, forget about the old one, here's another one, right? Yeah. I don't think there's a way, Mike can correct me if I'm wrong, to do like this, redo or, adaptive sort of approach with frameworks once they're in the system. But since, I do have a couple other points.
Sure, go ahead. Go ahead, Chris.
So the adage, the juice isn't worth the squeeze. You know that? So I'm beginning to think this is where we're at with this, right? We continue to try to figure out a way to get beyond the Garfo point, which is this isn't a priority for them. Every time we talk about it, we hear that. So if it's not a priority, we're not going to be able to do anything relative to getting anglers to submit reports. Why bother? Maybe, the alternative is we drop it. We just drop it. I mean, if we continue to go down the path we're on, we're looking at reporting of like 4%, 5%, maybe 6%. It's not worth it. The whole idea behind subalternative 4.2 was basically to come up with reporting requirements to make it simpler for the angler to fill out these reports. Now we're hearing that the ones that we want to drop don't work. So again, maybe juice isn't worth the squeeze. And we really seriously consider the alternative that says we're going to stop. Think about it for a year or two. See if, Garfo changes its priorities, revisit it. That may be the way to deal with it.
Thanks, Chris. I got several hands. Joe Griss, I think you're first.
I'll try to squeeze a little bit more juice out. Motion to amend. Move to adopt subalternative 4.1, remove requirements for report effort-only trips, and subalternative 4.5 require EVTR submission before offloading fish as preferred alternatives for the recreational tile fish permitting and reporting framework.
Thank you, Joe. I think that was pretty clear. Jim, are you seconding that? Okay, let's get that text up for everyone to take a look at. This is an emotion. This will be a motion to amend. Um,
And we also rationale while we're waiting.
yeah,
Just not
that'll
now.
work too.
I think the RA has been really clear about the concerns about 4.2 and some of the other concerns. I see some elements of this as being still very vital to jump on, especially 4.5. I don't want to see it die at the table today if possible.
Anything to add, Jim?
Just to add on too, remember when we were looking at the data, I mean, we've got 1,400 some on permits that are out there. Nobody's reporting. When they did the survey to find out what was the problem, it was a handful of people that are saying they don't want to fill out the documents, whatever. So we are really basing this whole issue about modifying the reporting data on some really limited input. So I think taking that out now is the right move, and you beat me to the punch, Joe. Thank you.
Yeah, well, I still would like to see that text before we, but I will ask this because we did see several hands. Was there any other comments or clarification needed before we have further discussion on this? Since we're waiting to get the amended motion up, Bobby, you had your hand up.
No, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and forgive my lack of knowledge on the permitting aspect, but from the recreational side, but with a open access recreational permit, for tile fish, is there a unique identifier to each permit, or is that a 1-year permit and then it is every applicant reapplies with a new identifier to that permit? Because I mean, I know from the commercial side, I have a couple of open access permits that it's a renewal. It's not a reissuing of a new permit. It's just a renewal of an existing permit. So once that permit is in, has been issued to my vessel, it's locked to that vessel. It's not, there's a way to track it. So I'm not quite sure on the recreational aspect if when a permit is issued, if it's issued to a person or a vessel, I'm not even sure. But if you have it for 25 and you apply for 26, are you just renewing the initial permit you have and it follows with you? Or is it a new permit every time with a new identifier?
I think it's the same permit that's renewed, but I can't. I'd want to talk with our permit staff and get confirmation of that, because it is open access. I mean, you're right. Most of our permits that are associated with vessels are renewals, so I presume that that's the same for the tile fish. The vessel permit, not an individual.
Okay. So we have the motion to amend up, Joe. I think if you've had a chance to look at that wording, there we go. Great. We had the second by Gilmore. And then is this discussion on the motion? Okay, so let's get started then. Now that we have it in front of us, we'll go to Anna and then Michelle.
So when we first got the report that sort of went through this this process, and it noted all the problems we had with the reporting and why people weren't doing it, I sort of had high hopes for this whole experience, hoping that we would be able to use this as a pilot study, thinking that if we are interested in seeing some recreational reporting that would be mandatory in the future, that this would be sort of a stepping stone for us to learn from. So we're at the end of this process and it's not great. And, we're about to vote on something and we're sort of told that we can't adjust it the way that we actually think that the recreational community would be willing to put the effort into. And yet with Joe's amended motion, not only are we not simplifying the pieces that need to be simplified, but we're potentially requiring them to submit it before offloading fish. So we're not simplifying, we're actually making it more complicated. So while I'm extremely disappointed to see this potentially go all the way away, because I feel like it was a learning experience and the effort was put in by the staff and the research was done, and I think the white paper that sort of explained all the problems with the reporting was really well done and very informative. I'm relatively disgusted with this process. And I think I'm leaning towards not supporting this and potentially just washing my hands of this particular reporting requirement. I'm not a fan of doing something when it's not going to be well done, because I think it's just going to cause more problems with the recreational community. And so I'm not going to support this. And if this fails, I will likely, put in a motion to just dispatch.
Okay, thank you, Hannah. Michelle?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And so since this motion to amend would, maintain the existing reporting requirements, Hannah, can you remind me again? So during the most recent blue line tilefish assessment that occurred through the CDAR process, the way that recreational landings were calculated was a little different that year. And can you please refresh my memory? Because I'm thinking that it used MRIP data, rather than data coming from this reporting. Is that correct?
Yeah, CDAR 92 used MRIP private recreational information as well as for hire VTR information. So if we got rid of this program, that essentially is we would put all our eggs in MRIP moving forward for blue line tilefish. Golden tilefish, they in the survey or in the SAC assessment, they use the large pelagic survey. Blue line's a little bit different because that large pelagic survey ends at Virginia. And since Blue Line is assessed with the South Atlantic portion, they don't have that LPS information. So we're relying on MRIP. So yeah.
Yeah, follow up, Michelle.
So I'm, what's that saying about the definition of insanity over and over again that isn't working? So I'm sort of kind of in Anna's camp on this. Thanks.
Okay. Other hand, Scott Lennox.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was ready to ditch this in December. The only reason I didn't was because we got some public comment and some industry comment in favor of keeping it going. So now that what I've heard is pretty obvious, the hints that are being dropped really aren't subtle anymore. So I think we're wasting our time. Hopefully this fails, and if it does, and Anna makes a motion to get rid of it, I will second that motion ahead of time. Thanks.
Other hands, Sonny Gwen and then Mike Louisi.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm beginning to understand what beating a dead horse means. When I first explained this to people on the tilefish not being reported, and we've been working on this for some years now, it was, okay, we're going to get some education out there. Then the third year we said, please, please, please report. And now we're on the fifth year, and I don't know how many pleases we're saying. And with what we're doing now, by not getting them to report, is sending a clear message. Y'all don't need to report. Don't worry about it. Just don't report. We don't need your information. So we need to get this done and get the recreationals reporting so we know what's going on out there. So I'll support this motion to make it go through, and then let's see what happens. And hopefully they'll start reporting.
Okay, I'm going to go to Mike Louisi, and then since I actually do want to call the question on this, it doesn't, unless somebody is adamant that we want to try and amend. But I will look to the public after. Mike, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm really struggling with this one. I thought we, walking into the meeting this morning, I thought we had a relatively clear path as to what we were doing. We took a program that was complicated. We listened to the public. We made adjustments at the committee level and through the council process of working through the framework, only to reach the point where now I feel like others do that. Are we getting anything done here? We're not simplifying, we would not be simplifying things here. But I'm struggling with saying that and accepting the fact that if somebody just says it's too hard to do, that we're going to say, that's okay. You don't have to do it then. That bothers me more than the process that led us here to this point where we are right now. And I know there are recreational fishermen listening. Anyone that's listening that fishes recreationally needs to know that recreational reporting is coming. It is on a train. The train tracks are pointed at you, and it's coming right into your neighborhood. I'm going to end up saying something I'm going to regret. So I don't know where I am right now on this one because I'm trying to think about the future. And in my mind, whatever happens here happens. It's not going to get done until 2029, maybe 2030. We may already have a new recreational program in place for more than just tilefish on the East Coast by 2030. You know, with the work that's coming out of the service, the rapid, I don't know if it's an assessment, it's rapid. I just see rapid on my emails all the time, all day long. All of that, all of this interest in recreational reporting, there's a ton of it out there, and we just need to find that sweet spot. But I'm really struggling with the concept that it's just too hard, so I won't do it. And sorry to kind of be all over the place, Mr. Chairman. I'm just a little frustrated. Thanks.
No, it's understood. And I shared Anna's frustrations. I thought going into this, knowing what I know about the importance of having, I mean, just truly unreliable MRIP estimates. I know we have a lot of species where there's high PSCs, but we're talking about years with almost no landings when we know that was far from the truth. So we needed some way to estimate that catch. This is a type of small special fishery, specialized fishery that you'd think all of this would work. And like you said, Mike, there are a lot of ways to discuss how to improve recreational estimates is exactly what exactly the kind of things, to my knowledge, you know, what we are doing is exactly the way that you would intend to get that better information. I believe I saw Mike Penton, you had your hand up.
Yeah, I mean, I sense a lot of frustration. I'm sure some of it is directed at me. And I just want to provide sort of some context, right? So I don't know, many years ago, probably 8 to 9 years ago, I remember Dewey Hemmelwright sitting down there complaining about multiple reporting systems and, federal permit holders having to report different information through multiple systems for all of their reports. And, that was a great comment. And it started us down the path of integrating all of our various reporting systems, both for GARFO, for HMS, and now we're building an East Coast, one-stop shop reporting system that includes the Southeast region as well. And so we've been, committed a lot of resources within the agency, within GARFO, the GARFO team, to integrate all of our various reporting systems into a single system. And what we don't have the resources for at this point, no one is identified giving us resources to create a separate recreational reporting system. And so until we get the resources to do that, the recreational reporting system has to fit within our commercial system. And so in order to do that, there are certain things it has to do. There's certain information that has to be provided to allow those data to fit and live within our commercial system. And so that's kind of what I was getting at today in terms of, removing some of these fields would break that and require us to create a new separate system. And we just don't have the resources to do that right now. Keep in mind when I talk about priorities, we lost almost 20% of our staff last year. We're not hiring those people back. Budget uncertainty continues to persist within NOAA and the government. So what types of resources we're going to have next year? I have no idea. Will we get more resources to work on projects like this? Maybe. And we can be optimistic and hopeful. And if we do, then then there's an opportunity here. But certainly nothing that we've seen in recent weeks, months suggests that we're going to be in any better budgetary situation next year than we are right now. And the councils have a lot of things on, as this council, New England Council, and the commission, they have a lot of actions on their plate. There's a lot of things that the councils want to do, consistent with the president's seafood executive order. So there's a lot of high priority actions that that we're committed to. And it's just not leaving a lot of wiggle room to take on projects like, creating a new recreational reporting system. And so, while if we had unlimited resources and unlimited, capacity, I would love to create a new recreational system and build the perfect system. But it's just not the reality that we're operating in right now. So, sorry for that digression, but I just wanted to try to paint that context for everybody.
Okay, I see a couple hands, so I guess we'll stay on continued discussion here. Anna, and then Chris.
So what if we just sort of shelve this discussion for 6 months and come back and reconsider those few items that are non-negotiable for the reporting to happen? As I think at this point, we're either gonna move something forward that's not gonna work well, or we're gonna get rid of the entire process, and maybe we'll regret it instead of coming back when we're sort of fresh and calm and reconsider those couple of things that you're kind of telling us that we can't continue to report without those few items. Because was it just one or two, or was it all of them that we were trying to get rid of? I think it was just two that you guys needed, that we had three of them. Location, gear type, and yeah, and gear type. So I don't know if we have the time now to go back and have that discussion to see if we could come back and live with just those, which I guess is what comes to Joe's. I don't know. I don't know what the right path forward is at this point.
Like, did you have a follow-up? One thing we were talking about was maybe putting up the list.
Yeah. I mean, I guess part of my, part of the issue that I'm struggling with internally is this notion that we've accepted as foregone conclusion that the current reporting system is just too complicated. And I kind of dispute that. And again, because I've seen the EFIN app in action, and like, first of all, like gear type, hook and line. And then, once you've selected that the first time, it's the default in the app, I'm pretty sure, just like, the way the commercial systems work. And location, literally just like point your finger on a map and pick a spot. So, and that kind of gets at exactly those are like the minimum things that we need to identify a trip in our system. And I acknowledge that somebody's trying to pick up Fish Online or the ACCSP app and walk through that system for recreational tile fish fishing. It's very complicated. The first few times, right? I think most of the commercial guys in the room who use those apps probably know the first few times it takes a little bit of learning, and then it's pretty straightforward. But there is this other app that's designed just for these guys that are recreational tile fish fishing, and I just really feel like if they took 10 minutes to learn how the app works, they could learn how to use it if they're making a lot of trips. And then, so I really feel like some of the resistance is just they don't want to report, and making it easier in a way that compromises our data systems, I don't think is the solution to the problem.
Okay, I think we have a few hands up. Paul, your hand, and Chris, did you want to speak as well? And then I know I have Mike Louise's hand. Just try. I'm sorry. So to keep you in the queue, Chris. So Paul, go ahead, and then I'll go to Chris and then Mike.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I agree with Mike about the difficulty of the app. It's not that difficult. And I agree with Mike that I don't want to let this go because it's a bad precedent. I'm going to say, and I said it from the beginning, we picked the wrong fishery to start with rec reporting. It's tough in a live seaway to do this stuff. And these guys are used to not following rules. They're the guys that drive 20, 30 over the speed limit. They don't want to obey rules. And I want this to work and I want to stick with it, like Mike says. The only thing that worries me about it is that this dead carcass is going to be floating around when we try to get the rest of the rec community to do this. And why are we going to do this if they don't have to do that? But I don't know what to do. I'm right there.
Chris?
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I think we're all kind of finding ourselves in a similar situation. Yeah, I think doing away with the reporting, if this motion fails, and we decide later we have a way to do this, I think doing away with it and bringing it back isn't going to make our job any easier. So I'm kind of leaning towards, knowing that the reporting fields could use some refinement is just what we suggested. This isn't compatible with Garfo's system, that we keep those in place and maybe revisit this later, or as Anna said, we don't take final action and we take another crack at this sometime later this year. But I think the discussions around the table are kind of helping me figure out maybe what to do. Instead of beating the dead horse, maybe it's still alive. We'll just keep it on life support in some way and figure this out, and not just walk away from it altogether. Thanks.
Okay, Mike Louisi?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I've kind of calmed down a little bit. Trying to think through a solution. So I just have a quick question for Mike, and this has to do with your discretion after something's submitted. Let's say the underlying motion, the committee motion, that includes a refined list of variables that would need to be filled in on a trip, comes to you. At what point does your office have the discretion to basically look at that list and say, this can't happen unless we add 2 more things, and we're just going to add it to make it work? And then all of the other elements that are in that original list from the council, that's what the council's intent was. But they learn not to try to. Do you have discretion over that? Would you be able to take and receive the committee recommendation with the trimmed down list and then decide internally that in order for this to be workable, you would just add in on your own those extra few variables that would keep the integrity of your system together and also accomplish the goals of the council?
Yeah, I mean, thanks, Mike. That's a really good question in terms of, the agency's discretion to, so if you read the Magnuson Act, when the council submits an FMP or an amendment, we could apply the same theory to a framework adjustment. We can approve, disapprove, or partially approve, right? So I think this would fall into the partially approve bin. And so we might partially approve by implementing 4.1 and 4.5 and disapproving 4.2. Getting into parsing 4.2 and saying, we're going to remove this field, but keep this field. That's pretty in the weeds, and I think would probably not be something that we would parse at our discretion level. We would, maybe put that back to the council and say, we're unable to fully approve this framework because of, these provisions and sort of highlight those. And so I don't think what the council is suggesting is we're giving you a menu of things to choose from to delete. Choose from among these which things you think you can delete. I would look at that more as the council's recommendation as a package to either approve or disapprove that measure.
Quick follow-up, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, so that in my mind, that solidifies where I am on this, and so I'll just let the council know. I would prefer moving forward to Garfo, to the service, the recommendations of the committee. And at the point in time where, if we're comparing the 2 motions right now, the amended motion and the original has more meat to it. And if Garfo doesn't think that is going to meet what their needs are, then they can partially approve the rest of it, which is what this amended motion is. If we want to keep the paddles alive and give a couple more shocks to the heart, or keep our foot on the pedal, whatever analogy you want to use, if we want to keep recreational reporting alive, That's my suggestion, and that's what I'm planning to support. Thanks.
All right, with that, I want to, well, I will allow a question. Bobby had his hand up first, so I'll go to Bobby and then.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is just a simple, trying to understand all of this. If this, regardless what happens with this, if this fails entirely, or we shelve it, or it's motion to table, we still have reporting requirements that are attached to the permit. So nothing's going to, I mean, it doesn't change anything. And personally, I mean, I'm trying to keep my personal preference out of this, but we've asked recreational to do some homework and they're not turning in their homework. The answer is not to give them less homework or more time. I mean, if I don't like to be this way, but there needs to be some way to compel the permit holders to participate in, in the what they've signed up for. That is one of the one of the criteria for that permit. If you apply for that permit and you are issued the permit, then you are bound to report. I mean, and I don't know if there's something that the council, it's even something within the council's purview. It may be something completely within the agency, but if there's, if you don't comply, you don't get a permit next year. That's why I was asking about the identifiers. If there's an identifier tied to a permit, then you can very easily see who had the permit, who filed, who actually reported. And if they have a permit and there's no reporting and they apply for a permit next year, they don't get that permit. And I mean, as much as I hate a no fishing report, this is an instance where I see it could be used, because if you don't have an option to, if a guy has a tile fish permit and he does not go tile fishing, so he didn't catch one, he didn't land one, but he wants to keep the permit, and he would have been, he would have been in the right, but he needs to have a way to explain that he made that trip. So I'm not trying to change fields and add this and subcategories and let's get rid of this and call that this and all that kind of stuff. But, I think we already have the mechanisms we need to compel the reporting. We just gotta kind of turn it on.
I said, I'd go to you. You had a question and then.
I did, the bottom line is if all this fails, we still have mandatory reporting on the books and it's still required regardless. Okay, so I'm for the substitute, but I'm glad to.
Okay. I mean, since, I know there's been a lot of agonizing over this motion. I will say that before I call the motion, I will ask if there are any members of the public that want to speak specifically to the amendment. I will allow brief comment, but we're going to need you to keep it to 1 or 2 minutes. Okay, not seeing, Mr. Fletcher, go ahead.
Rather than offloading, there are certain fisheries the commercial have to call in an hour or two before they get to the dock. And if that is in this, then enforcement would know. So is it possible to consider an hour or two before they get to the dock? Thank you for your time.
Okay, thank you, Jim. All right, those are the only hands I've seen from the public, so it's back to us. I'm going to call the question on the motion to amend. All of those in favor, please raise your hand. I don't see any online, so I see 8 in the room. Okay. All of those opposed? Eight in the room, 1 online I have.
Hold your hands up again. Do it again. Put your hands up. 6, 7.
All right, we got you, Chris. Thank you. Any abstentions? Sorry. One abstention from the service. The motion fails. 8 in favor, 9 opposed. Well, yeah, it sounds like there's some interest for that original committee motion to, we've had plenty of discussion, so we're gonna bring that back. Okay. Are we ready for the question here? Let's do it. Okay. All of those in favor of the main motion, please raise your hand. And one online. Okay. I see 17 hands. All of those opposed, please raise your hand. Service. And any abstentions? Not seeing anything. Oh, sorry. Okay, actually one abstention. Okay. So one opposition, one abstention, 16 in favor. Okay, motion passes. Yeah, I'll look to staff if there's anything else they need from us to.
Just for clarity's sake, I think we need a motion also to submit the final package to NIMS.
Looks like we have a hand for that. Mike Luisi, second by Greg Hewitt.
Yeah, I'd be happy to make that, Mr. Chairman, a move to submit the recreational tilefish permitting and reporting framework with preferred alternatives as identified today to the National Marine Fisheries Service.
Okay, thank you, Mike. And I think we've got plenty of justification on why you felt we needed to keep this alive. Greg, are you okay as well as far as you want to add anything to? Okay, all right. Is any further discussion? Any objections? Any abstentions? Abstention from the service. So the motion to submit to NIMS is approved. Yeah, go ahead, Greg.
I'd just like to thank the staff down there again, and sorry that, that went around and everything else. You guys were great over the last 3 months working with us and everything. And I'm speaking for Mike too, but really, you guys did a great job with us and everything. I'm sorry we put you through hell. So.
Okay, well, thank you. Oh, go ahead.
Sorry, one last thing. If you guys also want to submit a letter to NIMS related to those non-regulatory communication improvements, we could also do that too. Not sure if you want a motion, but up to you guys.
Yeah, so I mean, I guess for us, maybe even the committee members especially have been tracking this a little closer. If there was a thought that is something that we should continue to do right now, if that's something that could potentially wait right till later. So, okay. I'm hearing some folks around the table saying we're waiting. I'm not seeing any hands in any other direction, so we'll do that. And if there's nothing else, folks, I do want to share everyone's kudos to staff for all that you've been doing to keep this going forward. Thank you. Okay, we are back behind, but actually, I think this agenda item was perfectly timed. We just ended up back where we were before lunch. So I'll look around the pleasure of the council members. Do we need a bio break here before we get into the next agenda item? Do you want to try and move forward? Yeah. Let's do a quick bio break. We'll take 5 and we'll come back. The next agenda item will be the IFQ program. And we'll have, I believe we have New England Council staff doing inside. Okay. All right, if council members can make their way back, we'll get started. As I mentioned, our next agenda item is the IFQ program scoping for monkfish and skate. We have New England Council staff here with us, and we also have Jason online. So I'm not sure, Jason, if you're going to start us off, or if you want to turn it right over to Jenny.
To Jenny, thank you.
Okay, thank you. So, Jenny, whenever you're ready, if you don't mind introducing yourself, and then you can get started.
Sure. Hi, my name is Jenny Couture. I'm with New England Council staff. I'll be presenting the monkfish report for you all today. Monkfish, as you probably know, is jointly managed, so that's why I'm discussing this with you. So for today, we'll be discussing the IFQ program, or potential for a program for monkfish and/or the skate wing fisheries. The goal is for you to review and approve the scoping document and the schedule, and consider the joint monkfish and skate committee motion before you. Depending on the outcome from that motion, we're looking for input on our staff pivot idea to pivot from scoping meetings to listening sessions. So moving on to, where did this IFQ program scoping originate? Back last fall, the AP and committee met and discussed priorities for this year. You'll see on the screen, there's a lot of words, but essentially the highest priority items were review the monkfish CPUE research, explore options for moving from skate possession limits that are per trip to day at sea charge, creating a skate wing RSA program, 3-season skate management approach for the wing fishery, and so on. The lower priority items are listed on the screen. You'll see at the bottom, those are not in order, but the bottom includes creation of an IFQ program. The green highlights what was recommended by the New England Council Executive Committee. Underline is the recommendations from the advisory panel. You'll see that IFQ is not listed under each. So how did we end up with scoping for an IFQ program this year? During the December council meeting for New England, there was a motion to replace some of those work items and to scope for an IFQ program for monkfish and/or skate wing fisheries. And the rationale is included on the screen. Briefly, there was mention that this was supported by Southern New England fishermen, historically opposed by Mid-Atlantic fishermen, but that had changed in recent years. This was more of a comprehensive solution for both of those fisheries, more holistic approach. Fisheries are not operating efficiently or profitably. There's recognition that this is a multi-year, long, drawn-out process, but monkfish and skate management should be a priority of the council. So on this slide and the next slide, I'll bring forward just a brief overview of prior New England measures and actions that were undertaken. So for Monkfish Amendment 6, there was scoping for a catch share program in 2010 and 2011. Over several years, there was discussion on this possibility for a catch share program, really focused on maximizing yield and profitability and minimizing changes to fleet distribution and composition, allowing other fisheries to continue to operate and allow bycatch for monkfish. So the objectives included modifications to day at sea allocation, day at sea leasing, changes to the research set-aside program, possibility of integrating monkfish into the groundfish sector program, and creating this monkfish ITQ program. So after several years discussion, the council in 2016 decided to withdraw that amendment because catch shares were not the best approach. Similarly, but a little bit different, there was Skate Amendment 5 that considered limited access program. Skates is just managed by New England, but it is an open access fishery. There were concerns about shifting effort from other fisheries into this open access fishery. So there are actually 2 different scoping periods over several years, really to address the potential for increased effort into that fishery. But again, the council, after several year development, council decided to withdraw that amendment because limited access was deemed not necessary. So moving on to the scoping document that is in your meeting materials for today. I'm meeting with you all today, and New England is meeting next Tuesday in Portland, Maine, to review and approve the scoping document. We've already scheduled 5 scoping meetings from starting April 27th through May 11th. And we have a scoping comment period set to start April 20th through May 18th. So the focus of these scoping meetings is to consider IFQ programs for monkfish and/or skate wing fisheries. Council is really interested in seeking comments on the need for a program, what elements program should include, and how this program would promote conservation. So the document you'll see includes more theoretical benefits of catch shares, but is really lacking more concrete, robust information related to rationale for such a program. We, as staff, brought this up during the joint committee meeting a couple weeks ago for additional input and additional rationale to include in the document, but no such rationale is provided, and you'll see why with the motion. The scoping document includes several questions we're hoping for folks to weigh in on. What are the current problems in managing monkfish and/or skate wing fisheries? Can a program such as an IFQ program address those problems? Why or why not? Should a program be developed for one or both of those fisheries? What are the benefits or the drawbacks for managing fisheries under IFQ program? And if a program were to be developed, what are the goals and objectives of the program? What are the basis for allocating quota, fishing history, latent permits? How should the program be designed to avoid excessive shares of quota? Should leasing or transferability be allowed? Are both fisheries full components of both of those fisheries? Does it include that? Or just a subset of one or both of those fisheries? How are other fisheries that intersect with monkfish and/or skate wing fisheries intersect? How should that be dealt with? And then in terms of the process, the idea would be public input would be gathered through this scoping period, and then the input would be summarized and presented to the plan development teams, advisory panels, and the committees, with the idea that the input would be brought forward to the New England Council meeting in June, and then your council again in August for a decision on next steps. And if both councils decide to initiate an action for monkfish, for example, staff would develop and analyze alternatives, and this would take several years to do. Draft NEPA document would be published. There'd be another comment period. Final preferred alternatives would be selected, and so on and so forth. And because monkfish is jointly managed with both councils, there would have to be agreement on any proposed action. And it's worth noting that New England requires a referendum process for an IFQ program to be approved. So this is when the Secretary of Commerce would initiate the referendum. There'd be proposed and final rulemaking. Any program would have to be approved by at least 2/3 of eligible voters. If approved, then the Secretary could approve such a program. If the 2/3 of eligible voters is not met, that threshold, then the councils could go back to the drawing board and kind of start fresh and reconsider a program. And then eventually, if you get to 2/3 of eligible voters, the councils would be able to submit the action for the Secretary to undergo rulemaking and implementation. So you'll see in the scoping document, there's a bit of background information on management and assessment for both monkfish and skate wing fisheries, recent fishery performance, and some information on those 2 actions that I just walked through. And moving on to the recent set of meetings, so the Monkfish and Skate Advisory panels and the committees all met together as one big group last month. And to summarize the joint AP input, there's strong opposition to move forward with scoping. A lot of questions and concerns related to IFQ program details and what that would look like. There is desire for alternative management approaches. So all of those priorities developed by the APs back last fall. There are a lot of comments related to external factors really impacting both those fisheries and economic considerations that should be further discussed. Concern related to choke species being created through such a program, and then some questions related to why is skate bait not included. Skate wings were only called out when this priority was brought forward to the New England Council, and some urgency for council members to consider all segments of the fishery. The Joint Committee also discussed scoping at length and heard the AP input. Overall, recommended the councils not approve the scoping document. Again, questions and concerns related to the program and mention of groundfish sectors have been challenging, and since implementation, the referendum is unlikely to pass the 2/3 threshold. The AP didn't select IFQ as a priority. Even the seconder of the original December motion from the New England meeting didn't support moving forward with an IFQ program. There are 2 NOAA representatives on the call because it's a joint meeting between Monkfish and Skates. They emphasize that because this is a multi-year effort, that there should be strong commitment to move forward before initiating an action, and a lengthy discussion on more of the council process on, does this require 2/3 vote? Is there a way to pivot or change in priorities, and so on. There was some support by the maker of the December motion, thought that this was more of a holistic solution, and that the AP members during the meeting were really only not representative of the whole fishery and just a subset. So the Joint Monkfish and Skate Committee had a motion that the committee recommends that the council not approve the IFQ scoping document and discontinue the scoping process. Solution is in search of a problem. AP members and the public didn't support moving forward. So the motion passed unanimously with 2 abstentions, and those were 2 from the agency. And as I mentioned, there were a lot of questions related to the council process and the ability to pivot to other monkfish and skate priorities that were discussed last fall. From the staff input that we relayed during the meeting was that additional and more robust discussion should be had on potential management measures before deciding on quickly pivoting to a different priority. So since the AP and the committee met on March 19th, we met as staff and thought there could be an opportunity to pivot the already scheduled IFQ scoping meetings to hold those meetings, but really focus on ideas for fishery improvements for both monkfish and skate fisheries, so skate wing and skate bait fisheries together. This would constitute a change in council priorities for New England Council, which would require 2/3 majority vote. And the idea is to really identify what challenges are being experienced in both of those fisheries and possible management solutions. So thinking outside the box, not just rely on the priorities that were discussed last fall, but more creative thinking and kind of anything is on the table sort of discussion. This is permitted through advice from NOAA General Counsel. We've already submitted a new FR notice. And the executive committee met on March 25th and agreed with the joint committee recommendation to no longer scope for a possible IFQ program. They did, however, not provide a consensus recommendation on whether to pivot to continue to use those scoping meetings, but not for IFQ, but for a different, more like structured listening sessions. So they did think that repurposing the meetings could help improve management of the fisheries, but again, there's no consensus on whether to hold those listening sessions or not. So in terms of rationale, so the executive committee agreed with the committee, that the Monkfish committee, that there wasn't any unanimous support for an IFQ and didn't denote it as a high priority. So agreed that shouldn't move forward with scoping for an IFQ program. There's limited resources, so more efficient, may not be efficient use of time to continue with IFQ scoping specifically. And then in terms of if we move forward with holding more listening sessions, so keeping those sets of meetings that are already scheduled, but pivoting the focus of those meetings, the idea would be to present priorities that have been discussed by monkfish and skate groups over the years, bring forward information related to the catch per unit effort review that was done for the monkfish fishery. There's information on the joint effort between monkfish and skate fisheries and meetings last year that could be brought forward. We'd seek feedback on the different components of the skate and monkfish fisheries, so skate wing and skate bait, the northern and southern areas, and essentially just try to collect broad stakeholder concerns and ideas for possible future management. These wouldn't be done this year. The idea would be to help inform the priorities discussion for next year and beyond. So for today, as I mentioned at the top of the agenda, hoping for discussion and review and approve the scoping document and the schedule and consider the committee motion before you. And again, depending on the outcome from that motion, it would be great to understand your input on the staff idea to pivot the already scheduled scoping meetings, but shift in focus to a broader idea of what are the challenges and what are the potential solutions for both those fisheries. And then lastly, I just wanted to bring forward for your awareness, last year we combined meetings and work effort and analyses for both monkfish and skates. And the reason we did that is we had heard for several years that there's overlap between the southern monkfish area and the skate wing fishery, and that one is inhibiting the other from catching full trip limits. So we thought we would use last year, take advantage of both timing of both specifications actions and try holding joint meetings to see if that could serve as a stepping stone to see if whether joint management should continue or not. So we pulled together a report on feedback on how last year went, pros and cons, and it's kind of a lengthy report, and that is provided in your meeting materials for today and will be discussed more at length during the New England meeting next week. And the idea longer term is for this information to help feed into one of the IRA projects on governance discussions and whether more formal joint management between monkfish and skates should be formalized or not. And I'll turn it over to Jason for the mid-staff recommendation.
Thanks. Can you hear me in the room?
Yeah, you sound good, Jason.
Cool, thanks. So I think folks got a sense that there's kind of a rapid sequence of events from New England's December meeting to this committee meeting to their executive committee meeting. They have leads, so it's kind of a staff was trying to kind of capture the evolving nature of this, while staff, Mid-Atlantic staff certainly agrees that their scoping document as it was could have benefited from some more description of their rationale for an IFQ. Sometimes, scoping can help with that. So, technically, maybe you could proceed with scoping, but given the committee results, more recommending that the New England Council reconsider scoping activities to develop an IFQ program and instead focus on how to best address issues in the monkfish and skate fisheries. So I think, the Mid-Atlantic Council can kind of, focus on that pretty simple committee motion to stop, or it can weigh in more on what else to do. So our Robert Rule is the vice chair. There is a committee motion, so I think he can bring that forward from the committee and when the council's ready. And then, but I'll stop here in case folks have questions for Jenny or I. Thanks.
Great, thank you both. Questions for either Jason or Jenny? Not seeing any hands around the table. Bobby, also, I mean, if any other council committee members have comments as well, I'd be interested to hear what our folks, think. I appreciate Jason putting together the staff recommendation as well, and then we can get into that joint committee motion.
And
So-
Stephen, when the council is ready, if you advance 2 slides, you'll get to a committee motion.
Thanks, Jason. I saw one hand. Lori, did you have a question or comment? That's fair. Yeah. Yep. Absolutely.
All right. Thank you. Thank you, Jenny, for coming all this way for us. And I mean, it's all in our material, I guess, but I'm going to have to say that the meeting spoke loud and clearly from the AP, from the committee, that no one was interested in going down the road of ITQs. So our task at hand to beef up the section within the scoping document, why is the council conducting scoping? The committee was tasked with beefing up that section and describing how ITQs would enhance the monkfish fishery and fix all their problems and take care of everything. And of course, no attention was given to that whatsoever because there was zero support for going down that road. So based on that, the scoping document didn't get a lot of attention. It just got turned down and said, please don't go that way. So based on that, I just wanted to share the loud and clear message that came out of that meeting. I was on the call and it was very clear. No one wanted it. So the committee said, let's stop the train now. And that's where we were at.
Okay. Thank you, Lori. I see Ted, you had your hand up, and then I'll go to Michelle.
Yeah, I guess this is probably a good time to explain why I went off the reservation. I sat through a lot of meetings all summer listening. I've been an advisor since the early 2000s. Jimmy Rule was the vice chair back then, and Kevin Wark was on the advisory panel. You get to know advisors over a long period of time, and I got to say it was really hard listening to the guys from the mid talk about their financial struggles. New England's hurting, and the mid is doing far, far worse. They don't even have a whole monk fishery that they're selling into anymore. And at every meeting, guys said, we got to do something different. This isn't working. They talked about the economics of the fishery. And at every single meeting, people said, whether we go ITQ or whatever, we have to do something. This isn't working. And I've been on the monkfish AP long enough that the mid is always opposed. That when we talked about it back in 2010, and Greg DiDomenico was there, and we had lots of discussions, the mid was always opposed to ITQ. Southern New England generally wanted it, different generation of fishermen, but the Southern New England wanted it, and Northern New England, the Northern Management Area, had their own ideas. I sat up and took notice at multiple meetings where multiple monkfish advisors from the mid said ITQs, and nobody spoke up and said no. Tim Froelich said it, Chris Raynone, James Dobkins, and I'm not putting it on them because I kind of just at the December meeting had a thought that Why are we going to spend 8 years struggling with 1 or 2 actions at a time to save these guys when clearly they're on the precipice? And that was clear to me. And I think the only way the mid fishery is going to go to another generation is if they have control of their catch and all the nickels and dimes they're losing at the dock and in transportation and everything associated with not having a processor in the mid. The only solution is for them to have economic control of their catch. I don't see another generation, these guys surviving. I mean, these guys will survive, but another generation won't come along because these guys have made the capital investment and they'll ride it out. But without a processor in the mid and the ability to organize your catch and organize transportation and maybe contract with a processor instead of dropping a perishable product at their dock in New England, I don't see them surviving. You know, my background is economics. I tend to look at things that way. So that was the motivation for presenting this, was really more concern for what I was hearing from the mid and the fact that I heard guys in the mid that have for years opposed ITQ say at meetings, even ITQ, we've got to do something. And there was no opposition. Now, clearly at this meeting more recently, when the reality was put in front of them, they said no. And I'm not here to contest that. I'm perfectly content with, I don't have any skin in the game anymore. And I'm not here to grind an axe. If I hadn't heard the mid guys say that for an entire year, I would not have put that motion forward because historically the mid has always opposed it. And so just to explain from my perspective how we got here, it was born out of listening to mid guys, mid monk fishermen that I've known, sat in meetings with for a lot of years, talk about economic hardship that is more dire than I've ever heard them express. And so that's where this came from. And I don't have any commitment to going to ITQ. I had 3 boats at one point. I down to 1, and it's been for sale for a while. It's still for sale. So I don't have any skin in the game, and I don't have an agenda. But, you know, I thought I'd take this opportunity to explain that and explain how we got here. And there wasn't born of anything other than feeling for these guys and truly believing that's the only way the fishery makes it down here without a processor in either New York or New Jersey. You lost your processor. It's Hurricane Sandy in 2012, and it's been getting worse down here ever since. And the New England Council hasn't managed monkfish in about a decade. And, you know, that's a FMP that's always gotten the short end of the stick. So I threw a Hail Mary pass, and like a lot of them, doesn't work out. But I'm, yeah, I don't have any opposition or any stake here. I just thought this was the best solution for the mid guys, and I heard them say what they said, and I wanted to try and create an opportunity. Clearly, it's not what they want. Thank you.
I'm going to stay around the table if we have other hands. Michelle, did you have your hand up? Or? No, okay, sorry.
Yeah.
Okay, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Ted, thanks so much for those comments. I really appreciate those. I mean, I did reach out to a few guys that I know, you know, in New Jersey who participate in those fisheries and, you know, just asked them their thoughts about that. And they, you know, concurred with sort of what came out of the joint AP and committee meetings. So I definitely, so appreciate that, you know, I'm kind of lending my support towards, you know, what staff have recommended in terms of pivoting the scoping meetings to, you know, how can we more broadly listen to folks participating in the fishery now. But thank you so much for providing that context.
Thanks, Michelle. So I do see some hands online and in the room, but what I'd like to do before we go to the public is we have a motion coming out of the joint committee, so we have it up, but I'd like if Bobby wouldn't mind reading that in for us. And then when we go to the public, we'll give them a chance to comment on the motion. Go ahead, Bobby. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. On behalf of the committee, I move the council not approve the IFQ scoping document and discontinue the scoping process.
Okay, thank you very much. I'll stay at the table first. Discussion on the motion. I know we've had some already. I appreciate that. Any other hands? Okay, not seeing any around. So as I said, I'll go out to the public. In the room, I saw one hand, Bonnie Brady, and then I'll go to those folks online.
Bonnie Brady, NEFSA. I sit on the Monkfish AP, and there may be some people, Ted, in your area of Southern New England that fully support what you're saying, but the people that are Southern New England on Long Island don't. They spoke, they wanted to address latent effort. And in December, I missed the priorities meeting because I figured, priorities, come on, it'll be simple. I won't miss anything. Yeah. And everything changed. There are a lot of guys that want to do it. There are a lot of guys, they're first and second generation, but they don't want to lock into a system where it can only consolidate. They want to be able to have the ability for young guys to come into the fishery. And so NEFSA completely supports that motion. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll go to James Fletcher.
Would it be possible, as the United National Fishermen has pointed out over the last 10 or 15 years, to go to a dollar value to the boat and everything must be caught and sold, rather than looking at IFTs and ITQs and whatever else? Revamp the management based on money and get the fishermen back where they can make a living. In other words, if we had a dollar value on the boat and whatever the man caught was sold until he reached that dollar value, a whole new way of management. Could we spend the time that you have scheduled for these meetings just to put that out before the public and see if they would endorse it? James Fletcher, United National Fishermen's Association.
Okay, thank you. Next up, I have John Whiteside. Go ahead, John.
Hi, Attorney John Whiteside, Sustainable Fisheries Association, East Coast and seafood as well, and sea trade. My notes from that March 19th meeting were that at least 10 people involved in the fishery were not in favor of catch shares. And my involvement going back to 2011 on this, where it's time and time again, catch shares have been defeated. So I would support this motion that the council not approve the scoping document. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Last hand online is Josiah Dodd. If you go ahead, Josiah.
Yeah, hi, Josiah Dodge. I'm a member of the Joint AP Committee and also a commercial fisherman out of Point Judith, Rhode Island and Chatham, Massachusetts. Participate in both the skate wing fishery and the bait fishery. I just joined the AP this year, actually. I was approved and brought in. And to hear that we were going to go down the path of quota struck an alarm with me, because I have friends like myself who are younger guys into it on the Cape, who are fishing under qualifying permits because we have a limited, an open access fishery that you're allowed to incidental limit unless you have a limited access permit that's tied to a day at sea and have the quota to cover your overage to go fishing, or a limited access fishery permit in the monk fishery in order to catch a full limit of skates. So this isn't more anything close to a slippery slope. This is like an avalanche that would have to happen in order to fix this. I think the biggest thing is what I've heard from other people in the fishery down my way. And I mean, the gillnet fleet is definitely dwindling quick due to financial concerns and making it affordable, is to get away from this whole idea of IFQ and possibly try and figure out either a day at sea thing or anything like that. But that needs to also be tied in with the latent effort, the people who have retired out, the permits sitting in CPH that aren't active. I don't want to tell anybody that, you know, their investment was null and voided because of a year. So something's got to give and something's got to give. But I spoke vehemently against the whole quota system because as a member of the Cape Cod fixed gear sector, with the new cod restructure, when it went to go into play there in the northern Gulf of Maine, or I'm sorry, the western Gulf of Maine debacle that took place in the sector I'm involved in, went from having groundfish for people available to catch on quota to being non-existent. I see that happening again because when you start talking skates, the dragger guys up in the northern zone are gonna really start poking their heads up on quota. They don't historically land a lot of them, but they do with the monkfish. And moving forward, it's going to be a crazy thing. And I don't think quota should be anywhere involved with it. I fully support this idea of revamping and figuring out how to actually fix the problems in the fishery.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate the comments, everyone. I'm going to bring it back to the table. Any further discussion from council members? Not seeing any. Is there, I guess I can ask, any objection to passing this? Any abstentions? Well, I guess. Okay. Not seeing any. Jason, we can, I would say that we can consider the council passing this, but what, if you could tell us what next step is from this being approved?
I guess I would turn that back to Jenny. If I don't, I mean, Jenny, is New England looking for any kind of input on the mid's thoughts about kind of repurposing these scoping meetings, or what else is New England looking for from the mid?
Thanks, and good question. I think at this point, it would be helpful to understand whether using the already scheduled scoping meetings that are set to start in 19 days, I think, if we should use those already scheduled meetings to not focus on IFQ, but to focus on what are the challenges both those fisheries are experiencing, what are potential solutions, and have a broader discussion. Whether you think that pivot is worth it or whether those scoping meetings should be canceled. And I'll caveat that no other monkfish and skate work is planned for the rest of this year. And I think the timing would have to be either the already scheduled scoping meetings that are set to start the end of this month, or if folks are interested in having these listening sessions, that could be brought up under council priority discussion in December for something that could be done in the future. Hopefully that makes sense.
Yeah, I think it does. And I think probably describing it as a listening session is probably the best way to describe what could possibly happen now. So I'll look around the table to see what's the will, if any council members are interested in weighing in on whether or not we should host these as listening sessions. Go ahead, Bobby.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm a little unclear on this. I would think that it would be, you know, really kind of up to Director O'Keefe. I mean, it's going to be their staff time and their, you know, they're kind of in charge of this. They're the ones going to be bearing the brunt of it. Do I think it could be worthwhile? Yeah, it could be very fruitful, but if it could just be an expeditious use of resource that may not be needed at this time. So I'm not quite sure on the best way to deal with that. I mean, do we just kind of let them take the lead and let them figure out what they want next week, and then we circle back and just agree with them, or what? I mean, I always think that, you know, having listening sessions or you know, any type of back and forth with industry and management is, you know, extremely important and vital, but I don't want to speak out of turn because this is not our staff and it's not, it's not our funding that's going to be propping this up. So.
Yeah, thank you for those thoughts. I think Chris Moore, you have some thoughts as well.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair, and good points, Bobby. Like I said, New England is the lead. I think Jenny, you guys have probably already paid for location. You got those places set up. So, and given that it's like a little more than 2 weeks away, it's not likely you're going to get that money back. So I think we could acknowledge that it's really up to you guys next week to make the decision relative to whether or not you want to continue, and indicate support, as Bobby indicated, for general listening sessions, and leave it at that and see where it ends up next week. I think that would be a good place to be. Thanks.
I agree. So I'll look around the table. Any objection to doing that? Not seeing any. Okay. That's our plan. Anything else on this on the agenda item, either Jason or Jenny?
Nope, that's all I have. I appreciate the discussion.
Yeah, well, we appreciate having you, and I want to thank Jason as well. Somehow we always put him behind the 8 ball for time, and Jenny, you got sucked into that, unfortunately, but we're getting through it. We do have a couple more agenda items. Our next up is Spiny Dogfish Aging Project Summary, and yeah, we do have presenters here. Yep, okay, both here. All right, so it looks like we have Madison and Michelle. If you want to introduce yourselves, and when you are ready, you can get started. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks so much for giving us some time to talk about this project that we've been working on for the last couple of years with the council. For those of you who don't know me, I am Michelle Passarati. I am a research fish biologist with the Northeast Fisheries Science Center and the lead for the Apex Predators program at the Narragansett, Rhode Island lab. I'm here with Madison Phillip, who is the scientist that the council contracted to do the bulk of this aging work for this project. So first, I just kind of want to give you guys a little bit of background to talk about how this project came to be, sort of the genesis of why it was necessary, and Madison's going to fill you in on some of the nuts and bolts and results that we had. So let's talk about dogfish, everyone's favorite subject. Anyone who's been around enough for dogfish assessments will know spiny dogfish are quite a management challenge for several reasons, including their history of exploitation, as well as their unique life history traits. And despite being under some form of management plan for over 25 years now, assessments to this point have suffered from high uncertainty in several areas, including life history parameters like growth rates, longevity, and age at maturity. This species does pose a larger challenge than most in management simply because it is a low productivity species owing to its late age at maturity, which can be up to 21 years. Its long gestation time of 22 months, which if you weren't aware, that's among the longest in the entire animal kingdom. And the overall low fecundity of the species, so very low pups per litter. Now, the fact that the fishery is mostly female targeted sort of compounds these issues because females attain larger sizes than males. They tend to be the favored target, and the impacts of fishing pressure on the biology of the species can have particularly large implications. And so these implications can translate to major impacts on the stock's productivity under exploitation. For instance, the figure on the left shows the decline in the number of large females caught as a proportion of various catch series over the years. And you see a precipitous decline in the early to mid 1990s. So that proportion of large females in the population hasn't really changed much since management began. And over a similar time frame, you see in the figure in the middle, the size at maturity for females has also declined by about 10 centimeters. meaning the average size of reproductively active females is significantly smaller in today's population than it was years ago. And so looking at the figure of the right, which is the number of pups per litter scaled to female body size, you can see that there's a pretty high correlation there. And the overall result is a significantly less productive population in terms of pups per recruit in the current stock than historically. And so the key to being able to manage this current stock effectively is knowing the time scale at which these processes are operating, which is driven by knowing the average age at maturity, the average longevity, which tells us how many reproductive cycles are possible per female, and knowing the population's overall age structure to understand how many fish are reproducing and at what rates. And so, again, this is really the key to reducing a lot of that uncertainty and how the stock will respond to different catch scenarios. So, good thing that spiny dogfish are really hard to age, it turns out. Unlike most bony fish species that the council will be familiar with, who have otoliths that are aged, spiny dogfish don't have otoliths, so we have to use their dorsal fin spines, specifically their second dorsal fin spine. And of course, these are external structures, so they are subject to wear and tear from outside forces. So ideally, we get spines that are kind of like the picture in the top left, where you can see some pretty clearly defined growth bands, which we count and assign 1 growth band per year. But a lot of times what we see come in is really like the spine on the top right, which is broken and pretty worn, and in some cases not usable at all. Even the spines that come in looking pretty good will often have some wear on them, and we have to account for the growth bands that might be missing in those worn areas. So that requires calculating a worn spine correction, which we do by measuring unworn spines for their base diameter and correlating the number of growth bands with that base diameter to give us a correction factor we can add to the counts on worn spines to give us a ballpark for what we should be seeing. So all in all, it's pretty complicated, but I do just want to point out that this method was validated back in 2006 by a study by Steve Campana using bomb radiocarbon that showed that the ages were accurate using this technique. But, despite all of that, the fact that these are so difficult to age and subjective has led a lot of researchers to think there's got to be a better way. So around 2012, Wally Bubley was doing his dissertation work on spiny dogfish, and he published a paper that actually showed that vertebrae produced more precise estimates of age, meaning there was less uncertainty in those ages among readers. And, this kind of shifted the focus in sample collection away from spines and towards vertebrae. However, shortly thereafter, some work undertaken by colleagues here at the NAFSC used paired spine and vertebrae samples from mark recaptured fish to demonstrate that while vertebrae are precise, they actually stop depositing growth bands accurately past a certain age, which we now know to be true for a lot of shark species, whereas spines showed annual band pair deposition corresponding to the time at liberty. So again, while vertebrae may be more precise, spines are accurate, and therefore they are the preferred structure for aging. So over the course of this 10-year span, the science kind of came full circle and got us right back to where we started. But along the same timeline, we had the research track assessment starting up for spiny dogfish. And unfortunately, in the years during the back and forth over the best aging methods, the Northeast Center had stopped collecting and aging spines altogether. And so we weren't able to provide updated age data for that assessment. Instead, we reached out to colleagues on the West Coast at the Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife, who production aged Pacific spiny dogfish and contracted with them to produce ages from our NEFSC archive, which included samples through 2011. But there were some issues with the age data that they produced, namely that they were unfamiliar with aging young spines and some nuances of Atlantic spines that they weren't really familiar with. And due to time constraints, we actually weren't able to use their ages for the assessment at all. So there were some other issues that were identified by the Life History Working Group that needed some follow-up, including the fact that we were missing larger females in our sample archive. And we heard a lot of feedback from industry saying that these fish are still out there in the population. And I mean fish like larger than 95 centimeters. But, you know, we aren't really capturing them with our sampling. And we got some other feedback from Washington that our spines weren't being cleaned properly and things like that. So all of these findings were summarized into a lot of research recommendations to improve the ages that are available for Atlantic spiny dogfish assessments, and really just to reestablish a routine sampling and aging program at the NEFSC to meet those assessment needs. And this was actually the #1 overall recommendation from the entire assessment report. So in 2023, the council funded a 2-year project aimed at addressing these recommendations, and we came up with a pretty lofty set of goals to work towards during this time. And these included hosting an aging workshop to really make sure that we know the best available science in moving forward with reinvigorating an aging program, you know, going through our archive of samples and documenting everything, integrating the data with current NEFSC data infrastructure, developing SOPs for cleaning, aging, and archiving, creating a reference collection, aging all of the usable spines in the archive, which is a pretty hefty amount, collecting new spines from the current stock, training our age and growth staff at the cottage on all of these best practices and methods, and finally publishing a retrospective comparison of growth rates across time periods to give us an idea of how the stock has changed over time. So we're just going to go through each one of these and let you guys know how we ended up. So the first thing to do was to host an aging workshop. And basically we brought together all of the available experts on dogfish aging in the Northern Hemisphere. I beat the bushes. And we wanted to make sure that, you know, we're using the agreed upon best techniques to reestablish our aging program. This was held in North Carolina in January of 2024, and it was really a who's who of spiny dogfish agers. Notably, we had attendance from Marta Namick, who's in the picture there, who conducted the first comprehensive life history study of spiny dogfish way back in the 1980s. We also had Cindy Tribuzio and Beth Mata from NOAA Fisheries on the West Coast, who aged Pacific spiny dogfish, Wally Bubley, who did that work on vertebrae, and we had VIMS personnel and folks from the Institute of Marine Research in Norway, both of those groups who are actually actively aging Atlantic spiny dogfish as well. So all in all, we had 21 attendees from 3 countries, and we covered a wide range of topics. We had hands-on training and exercises using spines from a reference collection. And we compiled feedback and panel discussions into draft standard operating procedures and an age training guide, which are now being prepped for publication. The proceedings from this workshop were published last year as a tech memo, and the link is there in the presentation. And within that document, there's also a link to the recorded panel discussions from that workshop. So really good information for documentation purposes. All right, so I'm going to pass it off to Madison now, and she's going to talk a little bit more about the aging.
So the original archive consisted of over 10,000 spines collected over various years from the 70s, early 80s, 2003, 2004, and consistently from 2006 to 2011. These were collected as part of the NEFSC's bottom trawl survey and were in varying condition, with some spines having been baked, while others were annotated with Sharpie marks. We had a few with associated ages, but what little data we had on how this was aged was very unclear. In addition, none of these archive samples were barcoded nor integrated into the current age database called AGES. So we assessed all 10,000 spines for usability and found that only the ones from 2006 to 2011 were usable, which is approximately 6,400 spines. For these, we matched the data, barcoded the samples, re-aged them, and entered them all into the ages database. Samples were only removed if the data on the sample envelope could not be reconciled with the electronic data we had. So one of the major takeaways from the workshop was the need to have a more standardized protocol and development of an SOP guide that covers the entire multifaceted process. This provides guidance for methods for sampling on the boat, cleaning the spines in the lab, how to properly store the spines, criteria for assessing usability, the measurements needed, how to precisely measure them, how to distinguish what is a countable band, and how to generate the worn spine correction factor. Key areas had been identified during the workshop, and these guidelines were worked through with our partners at MAFMC and Norway. The main goal of this guide was to improve efficiency, reduce subjectivity, and provide specific guidance for future agers. Another key standardization and training tool was the creation of a reference collection that is specific for the Western Atlantic population of spiny dogfish. Our collection consisted of approximately 100 spines that were representative of all of the size classes. This collection has been aged by our partners in Norway and MAFMC, as well as Cindy Trebuzio and Beth Mata, who are experts at NOAA labs on the West Coast. This is a valuable tool that will not only help train agers and reduce subjectivity, but will aid in calibration of aging among different labs. So in total, with a combination of the 2006 to 2011 and the more recent spines from 2021 to 2023, we ended up with approximately 8,500 spines. Of those, about 1,200 were considered too worn to be used, and our final count was about 7,300. With our limited time frame, we prioritized single counts of all spines. Ideally, you'd want a second read of about 100% of all the spines, but with only having one reader and our limited time, we did the best we could. I ended up doing about 2,000 second reads for randomly selected samples. We did measure my precision and bias. So plus or minus 1 year, my percent agreement was about 80%. My percent error was about 5.5%. My coefficient variation was about 7.7. These are some of the best in the spiny dogfish literature. And we found no bias between my first and second reads, which was very much a relief. So for counts that did differ between the first and second counts, it was a difference. If it was a difference between 3 years or less, those two ages were averaged to produce the final age. However, if it was over 3 years difference in those two counts, then we said that those ages could not be reached by consensus, and no final age was produced. To quickly touch on the graph on the right, it shows the counts we had for the males and females separated by year group. So the light blue band bars are the 2006 to 2011, and the dark blue are the 2021 to 2023. We did try to be proportional for sampling. However, in 2021 and 2023, we did end up having more males. We do have about 1,000 spines from 2023 to 2024 that have yet to be cleaned or aged, so that could alter this difference. So over here, we have the length distribution by year group. The length is on the x-axis and the total count is on the y. Again, the light blue bars are the 2006 to 2011, and the dark blue bars are the 2021 to 2023. So we do see a truncation in the size structure for the 2021 to 2023 samples. We had very few large fish, and we saw a decrease in the maximum size from about 104 centimeters to 95 centimeters. We also saw a decrease in the average size from 67 to 61.9. I do want to emphasize that our sample target in 2021 to 2023 was for larger individuals, with a particular focus on those over 95 centimeters. So the fact that we do not have them in our sample size means that they were not encountered. At the start of this project, we reestablished sample collection across the NEFSC platforms, including re-implementing our sampling on the bottom trawl survey between 2021 and 2025, which is the largest source of samples for our center. We also engaged with our port sampling program to try and collect larger individuals from the commercial fishery based on feedback received during the research track assessment. We heard from the industry that they were still seeing large females, over 95 centimeters in catches, and these were just not being captured in the bottom trawl survey, potentially due to changes in movement patterns. We trained our port samplers on sample collection, distributed sampling envelopes, and hoped to capture some of these larger individuals for our study. Unfortunately, only 3 samples ever came back, and all of them were unusable. Feedback from our port samplers was that they generally did not see any fish bigger than 95 centimeters. We also reached out to researchers at Canada Department of Fishery and Oceans and VIMS to see if they were seeing these individuals on their surveys, and both organizations said they had seen a similar decline in maximum size in their samples. We want to reiterate that we are interested in hearing from any industry folks that are catching these larger spiny dogfish so that we can make sure we aren't missing any important viable samples. Having come so far with reestablishing our aging capacity for spiny dogfish, one of our last tasks was to train other NEFSC staff in our newly established workflow, using our documented SOPs and reference collection. We hosted staff from the Woods Hole Aging Cottage, where most of the production aging happens, for the NAFSC. Eric and his crew were very enthusiastic to get a crash course in methodology, and having this baseline training with the documentation and the reference collection we produced will make it much easier for the cottage staff to pick up the workflow again once routine aging for spiny dogfish resumes.
Thank you, Madison. So the final goal for this partnership was to produce a retrospective age and growth analysis comparing growth over previous decades to determine if the significant changes to age and size structure that we've seen indications of in the other life history data, like I showed earlier, are in fact playing out in the current population. So now that we have standardized ages produced for the entire archive and modern samples, this is possible, and this is now in progress. Madison just finished up with us at the end of December, so now we're sort of like able to utilize all of that data and move forward with some analyses. The idea here will be that the time comparison will look at 3 different time periods, which are the early 1980s, as reported in the Namick et al. 1985 paper, because that has kind of served as the baseline age and growth rates for our stock assessments to date. And then we'll have the 2 time periods comprising our archive, which are the 2006 to 2011 and 2021 to 2023 that Madison's been presenting about. So I don't have the Namick data plotted here, but I do have length at age plotted for these 2 time periods, 2006 to 2011, 2021 to 2023. And as you can see, there does seem to be an overall reduction in size at age. Although the maximum size and age of the samples seem to be equivalent over those 2 time periods. But this very noticeable size at age reduction is likely to have major implications for the productivity of the stock based on those factors I mentioned earlier. Again, this work is ongoing. We've sort of just gotten into the data analysis here, so there will be more to report hopefully soon. The idea will be to finish this over the next few months and write it up for peer-reviewed publication. But I do want to emphasize that all of this data is already available in our AGES framework and ready for stock assessment scientists to use whenever is needed. So just to wrap everything up, I think our collaboration really achieved a lot over 2 years and resulted in the redevelopment of a full aging program at the NEFSC. Unfortunately, routine sampling and aging have been paused at the moment due to resource limitations and reprioritizations that have happened as a result of staff losses in 2025. But we have produced an off-the-shelf aging program that can be reinitiated at any point. So the ages needed to evaluate the current population again are already available. In addition, I've recently been made aware of another archive of spines that were collected in the late 1990s from Canada and from North Carolina. So I'm sort of compiling all of the spines that people want to send in hopes that we can add them to the archive and hopefully down the road get them aged and just sort of add to this retrospective collection that we have to sort of tell us about the progress of the Atlantic spiny dogfish stock over time. So those spines plus the remaining 2023 and 2024 spines that Madison mentioned are all awaiting aging at whatever point we have some resources to do that. Finally, as Madison mentioned, I am still trying to conduct outreach to industry. We do want to make sure that we're capturing large fish if they're actually out there. So if anybody has information on that or wants to chat about that, I'm more than happy to talk and accept any donations of spines. So with that, I just want to say thank you again to the council for the opportunity. Thank you so much to Jason Didden, who was instrumental in making all of this happen and keeping things on track. And I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you both for the presentation. I'm going to start around the table and ask if there's any questions or comments from council members. Michelle?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks, Michelle, and Madison for the great presentation, and to Jason for his efforts in this project as well. Just tremendous amount of work, huge appreciation. Understandable that they're not the resources right now to continue with the aging. It is what it is, but given that it is like an off-the-shelf program, is that something that you might be willing to share with academic researchers who may have PhD or master's students or something, who could maybe step in and try to fill this void in the interim?
Absolutely. That was really the goal of, first of all, the workshop, and then we've been in close contact with our collaborators since then. Everyone has been super interested in this effort because all we heard, all the feedback was, oh my gosh, we want to age these, but we just didn't know where to start. Everything's been so uncertain, and thank you so much for, doing this workshop and giving us, a head start on this. And everyone's just super interested in doing it together and moving the science forward together. So absolutely interested in providing all of this information for anyone. That was really the goal, is to document everything and actually have a standardized way to do this, because that's never really been the case. So absolutely happy to hand off anything, to someone who could take over and run with it.
Thank you. I see one hand from the public. So John, if you have some comments or questions, go ahead.
I thank you. Yes, John Whiteside. I'm a member of the Spiny Dogfish AP Monitoring Committee, and I represent the sole remaining dogfish processor, spiny dogfish processor, Sea Trade East Coast Seafood. And I've made numerous comments over the years disputing what I believe and others who are in the industry believe that's a false proposition. There are very few large females. And I would urge any future research on this to contact me, and I'll connect you with that last processor, because they see large females on a regular basis. And we also don't see port samplers very often at all. It's just been a couple times over the last year. So that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Appreciate the comments, John. I don't see any other hands. So yes, John Hare, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. First, I want to thank the council for supporting this work. Obviously it was, the work is excellent, and sort of documenting it and sort of putting it together in a package that someone else can pick up is wonderful. And I want to thank you, Michelle, and Madison, for leading this effort, trying to get spiny dogfish aging back into the Northeast Fisheries Science Center. We'll see how that goes. But I think it's an example of sort of an innovative way the council and Science Center can work together on problems that have been tough to solve. So hopefully there'll be more. There are plenty of tough to solve problems. Hopefully there'll be some more creative solutions. Thank you.
Agree, John. And we've talked today, and as we have been a lot lately, including with NRCC, about the uncertainty of funding and priorities. So I think the process that you've taken here of it can be ready when everything else is ready is probably the best way forward, and really appreciate that work as well. So thank you. Rich Wong?
I'd just like also to thank you and all of the other spiny dogfish agers in the world for this new science. Developing this SOP is going to have a really long-lasting impact on our stock assessments going forward and the management for the species. I just wanted to ask, get some confirmation on that. interesting slide where you saw the size at age differences between the new fish and the older fish. So were those animals, all of those animals were aged by the same readers? Okay, just wanted to confirm that. And so what do you think, do you have any theories on what might be causing this smaller size at age?
So yes, just want to confirm they were all aged by Madison, which was the most important thing. We had to have some standardization there to make sure that the changes we were seeing were real. You know, those changes are sort of textbook for an exploited stock, especially one where large females are targeted, because you start to see sort of like the smaller fish at age be the ones that are successfully reproducing. So, you know, it's that's all I can say. It's just textbook. That's what you would expect to see in a condition where, you know, the larger females were consistently exploited. And again, in this type of species, it's especially problematic because that scales to everything, the number of pups per litter. And so overall, it leads to a less productive stock. I don't want to speak on behalf of the assessment scientists. You know, they do the real number crunching on that front. But yes, this is what we would expect to see in a heavily exploited stock where they've been targeting large females.
Thank you. I appreciate that. So typically, like sometimes when you see this smaller size at age, you also see an accompanying earlier maturity. Did you also see that then? Thank you.
So that is also part of the next step in our analyses is to get ages at maturity. So we have that. So that first slide that I showed that showed the precipitous decline in size at 50% maturity that we've seen over the last 20 years. Now we need to relate that to age to see if that is translating to a younger age of maturity, which I expect that it is based on, you know, this graph. So yes, and like I said, sort of putting time scales on those changes is really important to figuring out exactly what it's going to mean for the productivity of the stock.
Okay, I don't see any other hands, so thank you again. We have one last agenda item today, and that is the presentation of the 2025 Rick C. Savage Award. We finally were able to get the recipient of that award here, so happy to have him here. I'll start off up here, and then I'll ask him to come up, and we'll do that at the back of the room. You know, this has been an award that we have been giving out annually, and I'll just read the text off the council's site here. So the council established the Rick C. Savage Award in 2006 to recognize individuals who have added value to the Mid-Atlantic Fishery Management Council process and management goals through significant scientific, legislative, enforcement, or management activities. The award is named named in honor of Rick C. Savage, a former member and chair of the council. And he was one of the first members appointed after, and as we had mentioned earlier in the week, we are celebrating 50 years of the councils. So that's, you know, that's some time ago now. With that, I'd like to have Peter Hughes come up, and since I'm not sure where my mic will be, Peter, I think I might read from here and then walk that over to you. Peter just turned out last year. Is that right, Pete? Last year? Okay, yeah, Jim, thank you. Peter has served 9 years, 3 consecutive 3-year terms, which is the maximum. As many of you are aware, during that time, Peter stood as chair of the Mackerel Squid Butterfish Committee for 8 years and chair of the Surf Clam Ocean Quahog Committee for 5 years. In those roles, he helped guide the council through some very challenging issues, including mackerel rebuilding, chub mackerel management, surf clam and ocean quahog species separation, and excessive shares, just to name a few. Peter also served that entire 9 years as our liaison to the New England Council, and I think did a fantastic job of representing our concerns and also always helping us communicate the most in-depth detail of what was going on there at times, and putting it in a perspective of how those actions were impacting us. I think another thing that many people have noted in Peter's time as a New Jersey representative, it's certainly something I heard, that Peter was someone that was listening. I think he took public comment very seriously and was always attempting to find the best solutions, make sure everyone understood all the issues, and did his best to present the what would be, he believed, best as a representative of both New Jersey and of course the council itself. So Peter, with that, I'd like to present you with the award, and I'll head back to you, and then we'll give you a chance to say a few comments, please. Okay.
So thank you, everybody. When I got the call that I was the recipient of this year's award, I was kind of fell over in my chair almost. I've never won an award. I've been awarded things like parking tickets. I've got plenty of those awards, but I've never been formally recognized with an award. And for that, from my heart, thank you very much. A lot of respect to everybody around this table. It's hard work that we all do around this table, or did around this table. Some of it's very satisfying, and some of it's not so satisfying. There tend to be winners and losers, but on the other hand, sometimes if both sides are feeling it a little bit, then maybe we did our job, or maybe we didn't do our job. And that's what we strive to do, is find that center road. And, we don't do this for ourselves. We don't necessarily do it for our states. We do it for those people who aren't represented here in this room throughout the heartland of America and the United States. So with that, I would just like to say thank you very much. And I'll see you all in a short few minutes there, and shake everybody's hands, give you a hug. Thank you very much.
Thank you. All right, so I'm very glad we were able to do that. I got us a little bit closer, I think, to our final agenda item being close. And I think, Peter, that's one last thing we have to thank you for, is the brevity of your comment. No, but I really, I'm glad you were able to make it, and we were able to do that. So thank you all. We will start again tomorrow at 9. We'll be picking up with business session and have our report out. Hospitality is in room 4012. And good luck trying to get up there. If you need some help, I think some of us are better at that than others. And it's not just us. I've been seeing plenty of people not make their floor on the elevator outside of just us. So Good luck, everyone, and we'll see you tomorrow. Thank you.